Hello, everybody, and welcome to another PmP end of month review. That's right. It's May. Spring has sprung. It's warming up, even in the frosty north, where Stone Monk lives, and even more beyond the wall where Kieran is. It's actually blooming, and that means it's time for us to settle in for another PmP review. Now, what does that mean? What is the PmP? Why? That's the Painters Motivating Painters, our now Facebook group, formerly of Google Plus fame, where we all get together and share in our hobby journey together. We every month there is an event created for end of month submissions. I'm going to show you how to get in there in just a moment, and you can post up to one of your commitments, finished projects, I should say, every month for critique and feedback here on the show. Joining me this month, we don't have Kieran. We're not sure where he is. He's MIA. The White Walkers might have got him. But I've got Mr. Stone Monk. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Excited to be reviewing this stuff. The Facebook group has been growing quick. And so obviously sad for anybody we left behind it in the Google land. But it seems like we've got, you've all been replaced.
Yes, indeed. And if you would like to join us on your own hobby journey, well, guess what? Right down below, hey, look at that. There's a link. You can click on that. You must answer the questions or we will not approve you. So if anyone has a pending request to join and you didn't answer the questions, that's why we haven't approved you. We have to, even if I probably know you're a real person, you're a real boy and or girl, it doesn't matter. You have to answer the questions. We got to hold fast on this one because of bot accounts and everything else. We got to keep our community clean. So please answer the questions.
We can't look through everybody's pictures to make sure that you've got, a cute significant other or a dog or a cat.
Right, exactly. So answer the questions. Now, as always, I also want to give a shout. I've seen lots of great feedback happening, responses to questions during the month. We do this once a month. I say this every time, and I mean it every time. We do this once a month, but the reality is that what makes this community great is all of the people who are answering questions every day, who when somebody comes in and they need help, that person is speaking up and is helping them out, answering their questions, giving them constructive feedback. That's what we love to see here, because in the end, this is a journey that we all take together. That's what the hobby is. So with that being said, Eric, you ready to jump on into this?
Let's jump into it.
All right, man. Let me lock on me here, share my screen, and I'm going to show everybody who might not be familiar yet how to get into the event. So over here in the left of the Painters Motivating Painters, you will notice there is an events tab. If you click on this, you will see April review submissions. If you then click on that, you will get taken into where you can make a post. And you can see, like right here, I can just make any post, and that's what you want to do. You want to upload the photos of your submission. As we said, limit yourself to one submission a month into the end of month review at most. And you don't have to post anything in here if you don't want it to be on the show. That's okay. What we're really looking for people to put in here are submissions that you have direct questions on, things that you feel went to a high level, things you feel like were really good, things you feel like you want to get some advice and some feedback on. That's what we're looking for. So with that being said, let's jump into this and start the review, and we will zip back to the beginning of the month here with Daniel, who brings us a little acolyte, little old school. My screen's going to do that, by the way, every so often, so I apologize. I don't know why it's doing that. That's just what started happening, so that's fun. Which brings us a Skaven acolyte, very much going for like the green tone across the whole thing. So it certainly works for an environmental piece, because it very much feels like it's in this warp glowy environment. And so Daniel said he has some questions on doing dirty, worn cloth and rags, as well as a matte varnish that can be used indoors or in a cold climate, and any other thoughts are welcome. So let's get into it. First things first on dirty robes. Sure. I think the way people classically do dirty robes is to like paint it a fairly bright color and then wash it with a brown. but that's not actually a dirty robe. And it's one of the things that's just so immediately obvious if you do that, because what you get is you get darker color of like browns in the folds, but that's not how dirt collects, right? And that's what you have to think about. You've got to think, well, if clothing gets dirty, how does it get dirty? So it gets dirty most commonly, especially with a long robe like this and a creature that lives in the mud, by mud soaking up evenly from below, right? The other way it would happen is around parts that have sort of like high exposure to brushing up against things, like the edges of shoulders and stuff like that, would accumulate dirt and dust from when he's scraping against walls or climbing through little gnaw holes or whatever. So the answer with dirty robes is you want to make sure that you basically paint the robes in the normal color and shade them as you would shade them. In other words, make shadows, not dirt. Don't use brown. White cloth doesn't turn brown in shadows, right? That's dirty and it's too high of a value change. Just shade it normally. Use a slightly more gray color of white, basically, to create a shadow. Then you add your dirt by coming in with, you can use sepia and agrax and stuff like that as glazes, not washes. You're not putting on a big, heavy, gloopy amount like you're trying to wash. You're wicking all the excess out of your brush and you're just painting it along the bottom up. And you do a couple layers covering either like slightly more each time or slightly less each time, depending on how you want to think about it. In other words, like up to this level gets 1, and then up to this level gets 2, and up to this level gets 3, and the very bottom gets 4, right? You get what I mean? So there's a gradient of that. You can also come back with like pigment and scatter it along the bottom. You can do a little pigment on the shoulders because it wouldn't be liquid mud seeping up. It would be just dirt getting collected. So taking like a brown pigment or something like that is a very good way to get the shoulders and these edges. So that's sort of that thought. Matte varnish that can be used indoors or in a cold climate, super easy. AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, accept no substitutions. It is your go-to varnish. Get it, go buy it now. It's amazing. You can put it on with a brush, you can put it on with an airbrush. It kills all shine immediately. Do not put it over metals, it will ruin your metal. But you can put it over any kind of normal matte paint and it will do an amazing job of killing all shine right the heck out of it. For example, right now, your skin is clearly shiny. I can tell that because I can see that reflection coming off of the glossy paint on his skin. And you don't want that. Like, skin can sometimes have a bit of a satin sheen to it from oil, but not a glossy effect. So I would go with something like that. Now, other feedback, I like the very dark nature of it. The red of your ropes is a little too bright for this desaturated color scheme. I understand green doesn't actually affect red if they're in perfect balance. Like, I get that that's a thing. But nonetheless, I'd still add a little bit of brown or something and just kind of desaturate that green a little down. You could also just add a little bit of green into it. If you're going to go for this like all unified scheme of kind of everything in green. Now, if you're going to do that, then you want to make sure that all of the areas are very separated. And that's the main piece of feedback I would give you. It's kind of a dirty paint job right now, in that the areas of your cloth aren't, or not cloth, but kind of the miniature aren't separated as cleanly as they can be. When you're working in more controlled values, you still have to have some sharp, bright spots and make sure that things are cut apart. Like the left or the right arm, I guess, the ball arm is a good example. That's nice and clear. I can tell the difference between the globe and his hand and all that kind of stuff. But when we get into the main body and things kind of start to fall into shadow, everything's kind of hidden away. So you still want to make sure you have a little bit of light tucked away there on the edges and you've got contrast of light against dark edges. But overall, cool. I like the glass effect very much. Your like minimal red in the middle actually looks like, very Kit. Good stuff. Okay. I know the question we all had. How long was he going to go with that theme song?
Thanks, Hasselhoff.
Indeed. All right. So back to, so this is Juan Francisco Gonzalez Hidalgo. As we said, the coolest name in the PmP right now. And it's so funny because last month his comment was that nobody else thought his name was cool in his life so far or whatever. And I was like, that is insane to me. That is the coolest name I've ever heard. So You got to get different friends. I don't know.
Maybe where he's from, everyone has cool names.
Could be. He has the unfortunate, like he has a sweet name, but he's just in a friend group. Just everybody has amazing names.
Yeah. It's like if you have superpowers, but everyone else has superpowers, you're like, eh.
Sure. Yeah. That's a good point. All right. So here we go. Let's take a look at what he's got for us.
Yeah. So Juan talks a little bit about how he's trying to do some work with his highlights, some of his freehand, and those sorts of things. And I think we can see that he's done a fantastic job of getting a lot of contrast in very small areas. So the pants from the creases up to the highlights, on the armor from kind of the recesses up to the tips going to white. Some great gradients on the knife, etc. You look at the freehand on the word smoke, and on the canister, etc., and having that nice little pop. And I think especially if we can circle back around to the face, from the first picture, there's a ton of really good values just in that small space. That you've got kind of a 5 o'clock shadow, with kind of the grays and blues. You've got a little bit of kind of vibrancy and the blood running through there with the reds and the peaches kind of near the eyes and the ears, etc. And so I think there's a lot of really good movement of color, of tone, in every spot of this model. And even being able to pick out some of the different, the blacks, the dark greens, the light greens, etc. So I think there's a lot of good use of color throughout, and there's some good really good contrast throughout as well. A couple of areas that I think what I would say is that I'm trying to think of this where it's so consistent throughout the entire model, almost applying kind of the heavy metal, not entirely, but kind of a heavy metal approach to this kind of model. There's quite a bit of realism that you've gotten in there mixed in with the sharp highlights, and they're everywhere. So even down at his feet and down below and underneath the gun, things are seeming to be as highlighted as they are at the top of his hat even. And so I would love to see a little bit of variation, with kind of getting brighter towards the top of the model and darker towards the bottom of the model. So his pants perhaps don't need as bright of a highlight, especially since they're primarily cloth, and cloth isn't going to be as shiny. It's not going to be as reflective as a hard metal surface like his gun, or even maybe plastic covered Kevlar, like his vest or whatever. So maybe bring those highlights down a little bit or make them less sharp. But even more so, maybe darken that up down towards the bottom of the model. And sometimes that can even help just with kind of focusing the model. Like for instance, the knee pads are the brighter green, where maybe the model as a whole could be served by them being the darker green, and pulling the kind of the lights being lighter towards the face, etc. So some things like that could really work here. But I think there's fantastic highlighting going on. There's fantastic, again, the contrast in each of these areas is fantastic, and your brushwork is phenomenal. He also mentioned that he tried to kind of up his game with the bases. First time he's shaded and highlighted tufts before, and really likes the results. And I think we've been given that advice for a while now, and it's really well executed here. Where that grass, that tuft right here in the front, goes through the whole range of greens for this, and just really feels like it's earth and set in a real place. So yeah, I mean, I think if there's one thing I would critique is at the top of the model, giving us some more highlights. That top of his cap could have more highlights to it, and things like his knees and the pants that we don't see or underneath the gun could be shaded more, could be darker, could draw less attention in terms of being lightness on the model. So those are my thoughts.
Good thoughts. Yeah, amazingly well done piece. I dig it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So next up, we got a little Stormcast from Stewart with his first submission.
First submission, fantastic. He's not looking for competition standards, so we got to go easy on him. He's painting for an army, and it's always good to know what you're aiming for. And I can see what I don't want anybody to do is feel like that to submit here, you have to be going for competition. We're looking for people at all parts of the journey.
Absolutely. We're always going to try to tailor our advice to whatever both step you're at in your hobby journey and what you're trying to achieve, because sometimes we're not pushing it as far as we might be able to, right? Because we should, time is a thing in life. So telling us something like this is always great. Yeah, agreed.
I'm in this weird place in the hobby where I don't want to paint for competition and spend that much time, yet I can't help but take my battle line units up to way too high of a standard. So I don't know where I sit in all this. But let's look at this model and let's roast this guy. Just kidding. So first look at this is part of an army, and he's looking to kind of take this across the army and look at what he's doing and how can he improve what he's got. The things that I really like about what you're doing, I like your color selection, that you've got the teals and the oranges in the cloth. I think that's a great choice. I know that there are some teal, like the Celestial Vindicators have a teal armor, but being able to take the gold armor and use this on the cloth, and I think that this chamber of Stormcast does a really good job of giving you that freedom with the cloth to add color without while keeping a metallic armor. And so I think you did from this photo a very good job with the gold. One of the things that we always critique is getting enough darkness and contrast in the gold. And I think there's a number of places, like in lower chest plate, on his knee, in his shoulder pauldrons, where you do get the shade in there nice, but then you also bring that up to a nice highlight into maybe not the silver, but possibly a Retributor, or whatever the Liberator gold is that's a little bit brighter. So I think from this standpoint, from this photo, the gold looks like it's been highlighted well. There's a couple of things in terms of taking this across the army that to look at, and that's possibly having too many colors represented in your color scheme. Like I said, you've got the teal, you've got the orange, you've got kind of a mauve or kind of muted red in his feathers and on the handle of the sword, and then you've got a kind of what seems like a new green color in the sword, kind of that power element. And I think that you could get away with some of it. Maybe the green and the teal work really well together, but it seems like maybe resolving the red feathers and the orange cloth could be another place to kind of tighten up a little bit. And I say that because when you start getting 3, 4, 5 colors involved, keeping them balanced is tough. One of the things we talk a lot about is kind of when you have color in one part of the model, that you want to find that color in other parts to bring that together. Now, when you're doing a whole unit, that can help where you've got multiple models in the unit with that same color. So for instance, you've got the power sword with that green. We want to probably see that on the staff somewhere as well, in the power element on the staff he's holding in his left hand, or if that's the same green that's down on the terrain piece, that's the plastic piece that's part of the base. And that what that does is it gives the model the ability, or the viewer the ability, to kind of see that, find it other places, and it moves them around the model. So same with the orange. You've got that the oranges and the teal are kind of built in. You've got some spaces on the pauldron under the arms and down below on the tabard, etc. And so that lets you move your eye around. And now again, then if you're adding in the reddish color, we've got that in 2 places. I'm assuming it's over on the staff handle as well, and that moves around. But now you've just got so many different elements where they're pushing around. Not to mention, I'm not the greatest at color theory in terms of, does that red go with that orange? Does it go with that teal, etc. So in that terms, I would say maybe tighten up your color scheme to where you have just 3 colors that you're working with, and that'll give you that will let those colors be very strong in your overall scheme. When somebody looks at your army, it will just really kind of be clear to them the tone of the army. The power sword, excuse me, I commend you for working on kind of that light to dark and a very strong kind of onyx color down to that green. I can see the streaks in the blending, and so I would really recommend a couple of things. One, going to a brighter color, so going more to that green towards the base of the sword on the left side, and you flip that that gradient on the other side, so you go from the light at the top down. And I almost wondered if you'd, given that the front of the model, well, it depends on where your light source is, but you could have that reversed too. But if you have the dark on the top left going down to a bright green at the bottom left, and then that element in the middle is that bright white, and you reverse it on the other side, you just want your paint to be a little bit more thinned down, so that you don't want it really wet, because you want to be able to get that color blend and have enough pigment to move together. But some people will do that gradually. They'll do a brighter kind of white down at the bottom and blend it into a black at the top, and then they'll go over it with glazes with the green little by little to kind of bring that up. So that could be another way to do it. But just practicing that wet blending will give you that technique alone will give you a ton of cool things to play with throughout the army. And so those would be the kind of the main things that I would focus on at this point in terms of your first, getting the army started, picking your core elements, like the colors, what things are going to be which color, and then the thing that's standing up and sticking up in the air. I would focus on hitting that, especially with your some of these stronger characters with their huge bold weapons. So those are my thoughts. Right. Thanks for submitting.
Absolutely. Glad to have you along, Stewart.
You've already won.
That's right. Okay, so Wes brings us a new robot. All right. So he said not a competition piece, but he did take my advice on trying to darken the rivets. So this is also the first time he's trying to shade his decals. Okay, so let's take a look. All right. So I'm just going to scan through a few pics here. All right. So a couple thoughts. Good. Overall, there's a lot of things I like about it. Color looks nice. Like we've got a lot of nice working colors here. The green and the sort of copper along with the blue of the plasma effects looks very nice. So, color balance wise, that's fine. I think we'll stay on this image. This is a nice image to sort of look at him at. The biggest challenge I have on him, so very quickly, I'll cover things I think you're very successful on. The panel modulation, I think, looks good. You could take it a little farther, like some of the panels, especially these top ones that are very exposed, could go a little farther, like here at this center point and up here on the tip of his shoulder pads and here. You could take it a little brighter than you're doing down here, right? Like in general, you want to think of your model like a cylinder and the light coming in from some angle and the sort of top of it being more exposed to light than the bottom, just as a rule of thumb. So just a thought there. Now, as far as shading the decals go, yeah, I think that works. You could go a little farther. Like I can still see the decal line on them here. So like you may want to try to get, I don't know if you're using like decal medium and fix or like microsol or something like that, but make sure you can always just cover the whole thing with gloss varnish and then matte it back out. That'll make them go together. You can use like the decal medium itself that softens them down and kind of breaks them up, something like that. Microsol makes one that does the same thing. So you may want to think about that. With the rivets, I would say probably even a little farther. Like when I look at them, they're good. You've got them picked out. You could go a little farther, both with you want them to be highlighted a little more than whatever's around them. Like you want both a dark ring and them to be highlighted. So like rivets should be catching light. So they need to have a dark ring. They're a point of visual interest and contrast. So generally you want to get a nice dark ring around every one. or at least like 3/4 of it where the light for, directly from the light. And then it itself should be like either metal, like steel, because it's a rivet, it didn't get painted. Or if it got painted, then you just make it a highlighted version of whatever your tone is right here. So like if this is your light green, make this one slightly lighter green, basically. Up here, these might be silver because they're on metal, so they'd be reflecting. I'd say also you may want to think about something like a little bit of scratches or tears, especially on things like the decals. Have some very fine micro scratches of the green underneath coming back into these. That could make that also goes a long way to making decals look more realistic. And then finally, the thing that really caught my eye is this right here. Like we did this with an airbrush and then just called it a day. But it doesn't. That's what it looks like. It doesn't look like it's glowing. It looks like you airbrushed it with progressively lighter colors. Like this is the weakest point right here. And that's because it doesn't have the actual shading it should have here. It's got that airbrush, everything's fuzzed out and equal glow, right? So what we want is, if you're trying to give me the impression that this is hot and getting cooler, then I need rings of OSL glow effect. Like every one of these little rivets should have a dark line of dark glue around it, and they should be white. This should be bright white. This should have a dark ring. You see what I'm saying? We need like successive colors. Everything needs to be very clean and picked out, because if this was making blue light or something, then everything out here would be casting a shadow, a deeper shadow. And by the way, this edge ridge would be blue as well, right? Like if it's really casting something out. Like if this is engine heat or something, right? Like I'm picturing like a Star Destroyer engine. So you want to make sure we can see the details. It's not just fire in there, like a Star Destroyer engine or whatever it is, plasma or something. So we want to make sure we have that consecutive rings of light and value change. Base is really good. Love it. Love all the debris. Love all of the rusty, crusty pigment goodness that's up on his feet. He very much looks like he lives in this world. So I think that's really nice. And overall, by the way, the effect works a lot better on the hands just because of their shape, and because it looks like you kind of, where do we get a good shot of the front? There you go. Looks like you went in and we're a little more focused on it, and that's what sells that effect more, because we've got consecutive rings of light getting and dark and kind of getting weaker and so on and so forth. So there you go. Overall, super cool robot though. I dig him. I like him a lot. All right. So next up, oh boy. I feel like, Eric, this is you written all over it, right? Do we still have Eric? Is he still here?
Sorry, I was muted.
There you go. Like, look at this. Oops, sorry.
Yeah,
look at this conversion. My God, this is so Eric. And then I'll take Ryan Easterling's D&D character up here. Because I see amazing conversion. And I'm like, nope, bring in the expert. Stone Monk, get in here.
All right. Now it's singing my tune in a couple of ways. One, pirates. I'm on a bit of a pirate kick at the moment, reimagining what it means to be a scurvy dog in the Age of Sigmar. And these guys are pretty fantastic. And again, we've got somebody who's posted us multiple shots in one photo so we can look at it in all its glory. Also really good photography. With this kind of mid-tone background or black background with really good spotlighting. And then these guys are very well lit as well. And we're pulling from the Cawdor Necromunda range. We're using some Empire heads for that sort of thing. Some Dark Eldar hands, and man, so many different conversions that are really cool here. And then they're all riding. They're all what you would call it, surfers. What are those called?
Yeah, they're on the Screamers of Slanesh.
The Screamers.
Screamers. Sorry, I've seen the
Screamers. Yeah.
I assume these are supposed to be eels from the Ideneth Deepkin.
Let's see.
They're on that base.
Well,
I guess the one guy's on a round, so I don't know what maybe he's supposed to be something different.
I think they're all on ovals. I think it might just be the angle.
Oh, that could be. Yeah, I bet you're right.
Yeah, so finished Pirates of the Drowned Men. Yeah, this could absolutely be counts as
IDK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But manta rays and these cool amalgamation of characters, very cool, very very cool. So first off, amidst all of that, you've got some really solid basing with some lights and darks even across your sand. Really good colors in the rocks. Certainly not just grays. Being able to get some greens and that sort of stuff in there, and the tufts throughout. We're looking at, I think the peg. Sorry, guys, I got something in my throat tonight. We're looking at the stands, the fly stands as painted. I think they serve all right, especially in this photography with the black. A lot of people swear by just a black peg as something that the mind just forgets is there, kind of thing. You've done a great job of highlighting and giving these screamers some good color. I think they fit really well and draw the eye to exactly what they're riding on, and then gives us a chance to explore the riders themselves. I think the fact that they're each so unique gives them the license to be a more muted color, and just being able to first recognize that they're something different gives us reason to look and gape a little bit more. I was just talking in the last kind of review that I had about kind of the use of color, and I would say that I'm a little bit confused in terms of color, with the guy on the left and the guy on the top using purple and greens and reds, which I think work just fine with the orange. The orange goes into red; it's complemented by the green, and then the purple also kind of fits and is a, I don't know if it's a tertiary, but works really well. The bright blue obviously works off of the orange a little bit as well, but the purple and blue and green being in there, I think I'd like to see either the blue or the purple win that fight. That being said, you're in each individual model. I think you're using it well in a couple of ways. You've got usually an arm and part of the face, or feather in the cap, but just making sure that purple is found in or the blue are found in enough places on the model that it's catching the eye and moving around. Now, if these guys are in a unit, often that can help if they're all kind of got those elements, and I think that works out really well. But my preference is to kind of narrow down your color scheme, and in this you've got the dark oranges, the light oranges, the reds, the greens, the purples. There's a lot of things going on, so that limiting can actually be a benefit to the scheme. I think then, if I were to give any other critique at this point, I mean, the conversions are great. They look fun, and those sorts of things. It's playing really well for me. I think there's a couple of things that I would look at, and that would primarily be the horns of the screamers. I get that they're kind of, probably you want them to be dark in tone, but because you've got this stand that's pitch black or really dark black, you really need these to stand out. And I think I'm seeing the same kind of thing happening with the netting, maybe some ropes on the guy on the left on his side. That these things need to be highlighted, and they need to be highlighted really well. That the horns or the claws or the teeth of these things have an opportunity to be very textured. Right now they're super smooth, but you could put some striations in there. You could have them kind of be old and worn out by that. I'm experimenting a little bit with kind of the idea of ivory and tusks. And in a pirate culture, tusks are often, carved and that sort of stuff. And I wonder what it would be like on these guys if they had, more carvings or shapes carved into their tusks, or language or that sort of thing. Or even think of like elephants in, having metal around their tusks and that sort of stuff. I think there's some things that you could do to their tusks to bring out that element, because right now they kind of disappear. And that's a really strong element of these screamers is those teeth. Overall, though, I think that this is a great conversion. You're doing some great things with the basing, with the color schemes, with the mixing and matching these guys, and pulling all of this together. I love seeing these guys on the table. I'll shoot you a link to some fun pirate stuff over on TGA that if you want to be a part of that. But these guys are really cool. Thanks for posting them.
Awesome. All right. Okay, so next up, Ryan Easterling. He says, after 40 skeletons, it's time for relaxing with a single character. Boy, isn't that the case. Yeah, been there, buddy. Been there. Oh, hold on. His comments didn't come through. So based on a D&D character in a recent campaign, a lot of fun and should keep him motivated to get the next bunch of undead done. Looking for feedback. The skin and the cloak was where he spent most of his time. I'd like to know how they turned out as well as the base. Okay, cool. So let's do skin, cloak, base. All right. So, rating those, if you were to ask me, what do I think of them in order? I would say base is most successful, skin is second, cloak is last. So let's see if we can unpack that some. The base looks really nice. You've got a lot of good different scatter. We've got a nice mix of terrain. You'll want to work a little more green into your gray rock. Like we have very gray rock here. What happened? Did none of this dirt or moss or organic matter from this as it never rained here? You know what I mean? Like rocks don't stay this pristine gray in the wilderness, especially when there's not giant plants growing next to them. Like this would be mossy. This would have dirt on it. So we need color in here, right? So work in some green washes, brown washes, purple, red, anything like that all mixed in is going to work. But on the whole, I like it. I like the helm sitting here. I like the rock she's standing on. These little like grasses, whatever they are, they look really nice. Good mix of dirt and like your texture difference is really nice. So you got all the fundamentals covered here. Skin color is very smooth. It's even, but it's a little too even. It's kind of boring. I'd love to see more variation there. So like here in her leg, going up to here, up in this curvature here under her knee, down here, under her arm here, the sides of her face, under her cheeks, under her eyes. Like her eyes look really overexposed right now because her whole eyelid is very bright and the same skin color. And that just looks strange to us, right? Like when you're looking at this, you've got to see that there's something strange about her face. And what's strange about her face is that her eyelids are exactly the same brightness as her cheeks, which would be very strange if we saw a human that looked like that, right? Because we're used to this area being quite dark because that's just what happens. It's, you know, there's a socket in your skull. Whereas this area usually is colored to some degree, whether because of eyeshadow, which I doubt this character doesn't seem like one that would wear makeup, but she would still have a natural pinkness or something to her eye because it's very thin and there's a lot of blood in your eyelid. So it tends to be a little more pink. Same with the lips. The lips are still just basically skin colored. Well, I assume she's not wearing lipstick, which is cool. Or maybe they are pink. Either way, they're so close. If they're that pink, that's too pink. Like, I think I'm having to like lean way in. You might have a little bit of pink on there. Too pink, then is the answer. Like, they should feel more crimson, right? Even without, if there's not makeup to bring it into the red spectrum, then a bottom lip will tend to be quite crimson, right? It'll tend to be a deeper shade of skin tone of like basically I can't think of another word besides crimson. That's fine. That's just the word.
I'm not going to help you.
Sure. And same with the cheeks. Like, again, I assume she's not wearing makeup, but she would still have rosiness in her cheeks. Most humans do. There's a lot of blood vessels and capillaries in your cheeks. So again, even without like blush on, we would expect this line here to have some red tone to it. And the face is where you want to draw a lot of attention on a miniature like this, right? Like this is the home stretch here, right? This is when people look at the mini, the first thing they're going to look at is the face. Okay. So let's talk about the purple. And, you know, what we've got here is a very classic example of trying to highlight purple and having some challenges. And it's because we're going to lighter purples and you're probably mixing in something that's fairly white or a brighter purple that uses white. And what that means, you get these pretty stark lines. So what I would recommend you highlight your purple with is a pale flesh tone or a medium gray or a medium gray blue, something that'll get you into a lighter color without having the starkness and opacity of actual white. Flesh tone is just an easy way to do it. It gives you a nice soft satin finish. Because what you're going to do is you're going to use the flesh to highlight, and then you're going to glaze everything back down in purple. And that's really my recommendation. When you're highlighting purple, you can either, if you're going for a layer technique, you start adding in slowly more flesh and do thin layers. Or if you want to be a little faster, you can go for harder layers and go up to flesh and then glaze everything with your low to mid purple to just bring it all back in line, because that low purple is very transparent, has very little opacity to it at all, and will very easily glaze everything and fade the lines, while the flesh will still sort of shine through. So that's my best advice on those three. Overall, I think she's a very nice mini, and I think you did a good job with it. I think those are the areas that'll take you up to the next level. All right.
Nice.
Okay. Samuel brings us some of these guys. These are the new Space Marine dudes. I don't remember what they're called.
Aggressors.
Hey, wow. How about that, man? Way to go. Tell you what. Would you rather have the aggressors or this ice dude, the ice golem guy?
I'm kind of on a Primaris kick myself, so I wouldn't mind the aggressors.
Well, I'll tell you what, all yours, buddy. The fact that you knew what they were named, I think basically earned you you get this review.
All right. So let's take a look at, we get any notes here? I'm looking for general advice, how to get to the next level. Well, look to your left and your right, see if there's a stairs sign, and you found it. All right, so these guys, they look to be an Ultramarine chapter. Let's move around a little bit. With these really cool tiger gauntlets. And he's gone for a really muted, oh, it looks like, yeah, Ultramarines. Or maybe it's Crimson Fist, I don't know. But with really battle-worn, really muted colors, and just looks really cool. Now, everything I said about your limited color palette, I think sometimes, again, the major thing there is that it's hard to balance. I think that Samuel has done a really good job in a couple of places of sticking to some relatively close colors. So the reds, the oranges, the yellows, kind of, with the exception of maybe the yellow on the crest and stuff. There's a lot of colors down in the rocks, up in the gauntlets, the power fists, and then up in the kind of the rocket backpacks that all kind of blend together and work really well together in that tone, and contrast with the blue really nicely. And then the yellow is kind of that third color that pops, works with the brighter tufts, etc. And all around, there's a few other accent colors that pop in here and there. But for the most part, those things work really well. If we move to the next image, where am I? We get a really nice side view of kind of those gauntlets and that tiger striping. The third image gives us a view of the back with some of those colors again. And I wanted to go to, I really wanted to go to that second to last, maybe the next one, or maybe it's two more. We get a really good close-up of the battle damage. And there's some crazy stuff going on here in terms of, even some of the stripes are highlighted, how they're worn down, obviously after punching a dude to death. And then, you look on the shoulders and you've got these scrapes that are going in there. It's exposed the metal underneath to the point where he's got, we've all probably done, if you've done any battle damage like this, you've tried to get that highlight underneath. But he's even gone to the lengths of getting a shadow on the cover side. We've got non-metallics on the gold colors, etc. The thing I would say, I think I'm pretty blown away by the metallics you've got going on the chain feed ammo, and everything else going on. I think there's fantastic use of color, wearing it down. There's a ton of detail to look all around each of these models and find interesting things to look at. For the gold, I'm not a non-metallic master by any means. I've barely attempted it, so grain of salt. From my observation of Vince's work and the people we've had on here and the comments that we give, with non-metallic metal, taking it up to those brightest levels is always helps sell that shine. And I think too, some of the placements. So, for instance, up here by his eye in the left, up on that left side of the screen, is likely to go up to a bright white color and pay off kind of that sun shining in that area. And then, some of these shadows, whether they're in the right place or not, that's not going to be where I'm going to be able to tell you. But on the Aquila, kind of in the center of the chest, being able to see those feathers go up to white in a few places, and would really kind of help sell that as gold. From a distance, it very much looked yellow to me still. And so that's the only reason I'm bringing that up as a comment, is that to me it was playing off as just a yellow paint as opposed to a non-metallic. That being said, I'm very much a fan of kind of all of the kind of progression, the blending of colors, et cetera, that you've got going on, from the dark, deep oranges to the bright oranges, from the deep blues to the bright blues, et cetera. And all around, man, I'm struggling for any more critique than that. I really like these guys. I don't know, Vince, if you want to save me, as my reputation as a good critiquer is at stake here.
No, they're really good. Honestly, your biggest weakness here, where I think you need to, if we're looking for general improvement, the battle damage is bringing it down. Okay, like I understand what you were going for, but it's too big. Like these scratches are way too big and and way too just thick. That's the challenge. I agree with your feedback on the gold. It needs to come up to a brighter color. It needs to have some edges. Like one of the places you're actually mixing is your edge highlights aren't strong enough in some places. Like I can see them, but they're pretty weak in here. They should be pretty clean and sparkling. Same with here on the Aquila, stuff like that. But it's the battle damage that's the weakest part. Like when we look back here, and by the way, these are gorgeous. So please don't read this as me being anything but just honest, because like these look absolutely wonderful. I want to make that clear. I'm just trying to give you some good feedback. So like these scratches are so massive and even. Every one of them is about the same width, right? And there's no sort of logical placement to them, like what's causing them. These look like probably they got scratched when they punched through somebody, but there's so much gray there, right? Whereas I get the distinct feeling you're trying to show me exposed metal, but that's like that this got torn. That what happened here is this got torn back and you're trying to show me exposed metal underneath, but it doesn't read as that, right? If you had these be more jagged, if you had them be of varying widths, if you had them like tear wide to thin as something would get peeled away, if you had them more dark with just a thin edge light highlight, if you want to go for showing metal underneath, then you need like a much deeper gray, because that metal wouldn't be shiny. It's not painted. It's been enameled over, right? And so getting scratched away is just going to reveal like a mid-tone gray with a lot of darkness around it, because it'll be a triangular cut in where it gets whatever caused that had to have a sharp edge to tear into it, right? So it's going to have a naturally triangular shape to the incision. Same up here. Like if you just thinned these out, randomize them more, right now they're very like hot dog shaped, right? And what we want is a much more organic pattern of it being like that. You can still have a center line of like the scratch, but I mean, if you've ever peeled, you ever put tape up on a wall that you're trying to paint, and then you peel that tape off really too fast and you rip some of the paint with it, right? That's over the top. It doesn't come off like this, right? It comes off in this weird, jagged, random pattern, whatever happened to pull, right? Based on the sort of micro flaws in the fibers. So that would be my main source of feedback. Color-wise, business-wise, like the lighting, the shading, the tonal variation, all that is really expertly handled. These guys are absolutely stunning. The bases look great. They're really, really wonderful. The OSL out of the eyes looks fantastic. It's just that damage. You need to thin that out, make it more random, vary the width, vary the type, vary the shape. add more dots instead of just scratches, and get deeper, darker colors with sharper, lower edges on them. That's my advice. But overall, really, really great stuff, Sam. Okay. Let's talk about this guy. Casper says he's trying to advance from army painter through many years to the next level. Been practicing airbrush and glazing techniques. Would like feedback on especially those and what could be improved and how. He said he's aware of the line in the hip. Yeah, that's fine. This guy's got some horrible gaps. Yeah, so I've painted this dude. This guy's in Rasputina's crew in Malifaux. I like this model a lot. I think he's pretty cool. Yeah, my answer is you need more tonal variation. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's a thing that I've said many times, so nobody's getting shocked over here. But the answer is really that, like, what we've got here is, if you're going for ice, there's no deep colors on him, right? He's very consistently bright. So we need to have either more colors hidden down in him, like to a darker blue, or we need to go more like transitions up to a sharp white. You can also do, in other words, like, I'll break this down to a microcosm and make this pretty real. Let's just talk about his fist here. Okay. If we're truly trying to capture ice, and we don't want to go through like the long thing of making each finger its own icicle, which, respect, nobody wants to do that. Then when we're doing this with an airbrush, which is fine, then what you want to do is you want to start darker, right? So start with your airbrush in a darker tone, and then apply your airbrush at more of an angle, so that you're only catching the light up in certain places. Like, start in a deeper blue, and then from that you can then get that high contrast in there. I hope that makes sense. Because then what would happen is, like, this, I can see some deep blue here, or purple, which is good, but it's not enough, right? It should be out here more, like the lower part of his fingers should be that rich blue tone going up into this white, because that sort of like ice, as we're trying to capture it here, should have a lot more blue in it. So it's sort of, that's just generally how you fake ice, as it were, right? In a miniature form. Of course, that's not really what ice looks like, but hey, it's artistic license, right? So that would be my main advice for you there. Overall, I think, like, you're pretty successful when it comes to what you're aiming at here, which is having a guy who looks like he's made of ice. I don't not get that. Like, he does certainly still look icy. I just think he could go a little farther if you did something like that. So that would be my thoughts for you. I hope that's helpful. But overall, he's a cool dude. He's a fun paint job. He really is. So I hope you had a good time with him. He came out very nice. All right. Oh, big old vermin lord. And then we got a pile of Nerdlings. Well, guess what? You mind if I just keep talking?
I don't know. I mean, I saw you post some Nerdle.
I did.
Painted. I'm feeling like calling a little BS on this heavy. Can you take this one stuff?
Look,
I feel a little betrayed.
I can take Death Guard. Death Guard are fine. Death Guard keep all their grossness inside where it belongs. They're mostly just Space Marines that have a few tentacles hanging out of them. That's all Death Guard are.
All right, I'll take the Nerdlings for you.
All right, excellent. You're my hero as ever. Okay. So, yeah, let's talk about our Vermin Lord Warpseer here. Up on top of the mausoleum. One of the most popular basing buildings of all time, I suspect this thing is. I see a lot of miniatures standing on this building. So let's get to a little more of a, there you go, a little more of a front shot. Yeah, I mean, overall, I think this guy looks really nice. A lot of good transitions. Some things I really, really like. The blades I really enjoy. That is to say, the end of both ends of the big halberd thing. I think that looks pretty fantastic. Good, really, really good light catches in the NMM. The green, it looks wonderful. Very nice OSL effect. Nice dark circle around the glowing gems with a soft glow cast off of it. Same with the tail whippy blades, the whippy tail blades, and his little metal that's like I don't know, on his loincloth or whatever that is, his tabard. So I think that looks good. I dig all that. The horn transitions looks really nice. I think he looks much better against the dark background. There you go. Just easier to see color here. So the horn transitions look really good. These big ridiculous horns and these guys are pretty annoying. But you did a good job there. The skin and the armor and all that, like everything here looks good. I do enjoy like the sort of glowing effect down in the bottom of the base to create some more visual interest down there, like maybe some lava or something is what it looks like coming out of there. I guess he's playing the carpet's lava. That's why he's on top of the building. So that's cool. All in all, I think what could probably use some attention, like where do I see some opportunity? So a couple of places. I think the red armor looks nice. It's kind of a lacquered armor. I don't think that's an issue. I think and I even think the fur on the back looks good. The fur could use a little more color variation on the front, making it look more like the back. Like here, it's not, or at least in the picture, and maybe that's what's doing it. It doesn't look like it has as much variation as it does here. Like the back fur looks really nice. I hate the way fur on these guys is so weird. But the skin is the main part I see where we have some opportunity. It's like it just feels kind of flat. Like I'm really looking at all the skin here. Got some nice red tones here and here, maybe here. I just feel like we could have gone a little farther on that. Especially up here in his face, here under his arms. Like it's good shading. It's present. Like I can see it. I can see where you put the lights and shadows in. So it's good. Like I like your red tones and your placement. I feel like it could have gone a little bit farther, especially since the armor is naturally quite flat in its variation, which feels appropriate, by the way. That's not a judgment. I actually think that looks really good like that. I like the soft, subtle transition on the lacquer armor because it's a fairly non-reflective surface. So it's pretty even. I'm okay with that. But then I think to counter that, I would have liked to see a little more variation on the skin itself. Probably some deeper shadows, especially here within the legs and under the arm. I think that's probably my main source. Other than that, I think this guy looks really, really great. I think he's absolutely wonderful. The true standouts for me, the transition on the tail looks really nice. Your color blend there leads the eye really well back up to the other green globe. The horns look really good, and the blades are absolutely top-notch. Fantastic work. One quick note on those blades, by the way, if you want to take this sort of up a little more, is you have 3 light points that are all pretty much the same size. Like this light line is the same width as this one. Vary these some, like make this one thin, this one thicker, and this one somewhere in between the two. It'll look better. And that's not a judgment. This looks really good right now. But what you're meant to be capturing here is sort of the random reflection of objects in the world, right? Like it's hitting the light of the sun and then bouncing off of other things around there. And that's giving you sort of multiple reflection points, right? You're capturing light pollution. Well, the light wouldn't be evenly distributed because you're trying to capture a random effect. So you want that to feel pretty random in its variance. So varying the width can be a good way to sell that. Just a quick thought. Very cool, though, overall. All right, Nerdlings. We got us some Nerdlings. Mr. Monk, are you on mute?
Yes, always. So one of the 2 things he's looking for, he had a ton of fun making these. He's looking for feedback in photography, but also improving the contrast and taking it to the next level. We got a lot of people wanting to go to the next level, and you're in the right place.
That's what we're here for.
So I think as I was looking at this, I was trying to figure out. I mean, those green, it goes pretty bright, but I think maybe where we're losing some contrast is in kind of our ordering of color of our greens and our highlights. Your dark green goes into kind of like a chalky white minty green, and then up to a kind of very juicy green. And I think you may want to reverse that order so that your kind of lime green or I don't know, mucus green follows the
juicy green TM registered trademark PmP review.
follows that dark green, so that's your next layer on top of the dark green, and then your really light minty green could be a highlight on top of that to find those points where we're reflecting light and showing moisture, etc. And so I think some of your issues may be there because that bright green, I can see where you want that to be very prominent with these guys and have them kind of be on that neon feel. But because it's on, inconsistently on top of a very muted green, I think you want to reverse that. So there's more of this bright green and then a less as a highlight of the bright, whitish green. So that'd be one area where I would say it would help you fit that contrast. The other thing would be because this is a model and you're treating each of the little Nerdlings as individual models, they don't all need to be shaded the same. In fact, the guys on the top are way more important than the ones on the bottom, because if the ones on the bottom were more important, they'd be on the top.
That's right. You don't get to the top of a Nurgling pile without some work.
Yep. So you can leave, if you were to start with your dark tone, and then you go to your bright green, juicy green tone. You wouldn't put that juicy green tone evenly across all these guys. You would give that more of that to the top guys and less of that to the bottom guys. And then finally, with that bright tone, similarly, you would give more of that highlight to the guys on top. And down below, you would just highlight the areas that were visible or were, touched by the juicy green. And so you get more contrast, especially with a model like this where everything's fighting for attention. It gives you the ability to kind of draw the eye to the top models of this pile. And I think, so then the other thing I would say is your pink color could also, I see that you've used kind of maybe a purple or something like that in the shade. But even adding some purple to your actual surface color and then bringing that up to the pink and then to the bright pink would also do some of that as well. Get a little bit more color variation in there to bring that contrast and give us tonal movement, etc. On photography, it looks like these guys are maybe washed out a little bit. And it is such a small model that getting this close is always going to kind of pull out some. It's going to be maybe not easy to focus on all the detail. But I think they've probably just been washed out, maybe too much light in this case. I think your background looks like a good match. So that's probably not the issue. But I would say just getting a nice even light, but at the right distance so that it touches them but doesn't blow it out too much would be the answer. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Nice. Oh, Nurgling piles. The second best form of Nurgle. All right. So now we've got Jeff, who has some individual minis, and then we have Benjamin, who's bringing us the Sisters of Sigmar. What's your history with the Sisters of Sigmar?
I got none.
All right. I would love to take these sisters.
Yeah.
He even says it, and he's right. I love these figures so much. All right. So you mind keeping rocking here and going on with Jeff?
Sure. Let's go.
All right.
I love this Ranger. I think it's one of the more popular Reaper mini models that gets used often, and I'm good to see it again. Let's flip through a couple of these. Got multiple models. That's a cool one. Ooh, a fun little snail. Really cool things there with the colors. A kind of squig orc. All right, so there's a lot of different things going on here. So let's focus in. Let's talk about. He says he's trying to make an effort not to use such bright colors, stronger, more subtle contrast, and continue cultivating more patience and slow down. So let's pick something like let's go with this guy to talk about this in general. And I could see very much so in some of the other things that you were doing that you weren't, until we hit the snail. I think you were using pretty muted tones, which I think showed some that you were sticking to that quite a bit. Now with this guy, there's, obviously we've got some brightness in the hair. We've got a little bit of brightness in the tufts. And for some reason, they look like they were cut by a lawnmower at the exact same height. So you could probably take a scissors to that and kind of uneven that a little bit. But I think, so what you're trying to do is get a little bit more muted. Now, it seems like, from what I can see, that you've got kind of your similar color palette, and maybe you're just trying to use less of it, which means maybe not using it to as bright of an extreme or using it as many places. And I think that can work as well. But sometimes if you want to go with a less bright scheme, you've got to switch those colors up a little bit, maybe do a little bit mixing. So instead of that bright yellow there, which you've probably been guilty of using by your own mission in other places to too much of a degree, what you may have wanted to do here is tone that down with another color, either a brown or even a red. Not to go to an orange, but just trying to take it down from a bright corn yellow to something more like a dirty yellow, so more of a tan or something like that. So I think one aspect would be to look at the colors you're using and see if you can mute them a little bit rather than just using them less or in fewer spots. And so that would be just something to think about in terms of your color palette. My color palette has slowly grown over time, and I have a ton of bright colors. I like a lot of bright colors as well. But there's a number of colors that are very muted in my collection that I always go to when I want to just tone it down, when I want to make something more subtle. So for instance, Thunderhawk blue compared to Cantor blue is much more muted or desaturated blue. What is the Tuscarora fur is kind of a pinkish brown, which can sometimes feel brown and sometimes feel pink, and is a fun one to use to just kind of. Sometimes I use that as my under eye and gum color because it's pink, but it's not like bright and it's not too much of anything. So that might be one thing to think about. I like that you've used some contrast. It looks like you've got some blue in the recesses coming up to the green. You should definitely try mixing blue and green together to get some of those muted tones, or some blue, green, and a little bit of brown to do that. But overall, I think you have shown, it does seem to me that you've shown some restraint in how much you're covering the mini. So that bright green is showing up just kind of at the highest spots. And I think that's really good. What I would suggest also is when we're working on, I think that if you work on cleaning up your blocking, you're going to see a lot of improvement as well. So for instance, I see some blue bleeding into that glove or hand on that's lowered to the bow. I see that that space between the hair and where the hair ends and where the cloth begins is kind of I don't know, it's a tricky spot, and you maybe didn't get all of the hair, and there's still some plastic that should be colored by hair, but is the green that could be blocked out. So I think that that's another area that's really important, blocking those things out, and then to be able to kind of help with the patients and help with the kind of the taking a step back and making sure that everything is got the color it's supposed to have at the base, and then work from there. You give yourself a solid base, and everything's going to be a lot easier to carry up. So I think it's a fantastic exercise to try something different, and I think that you could be helped out a lot by maybe picking a few paint colors that you wouldn't have expected to like or wouldn't usually pick, and kind of switching your palette out for something like that. So it's a fun exercise, and it's something that I try not to come back to the same paint colors every army, but even Vince can attest that sometimes your favorites are your favorites,
I don't know what you're talking about, man. That's, always, me. Never use the same color twice. That's my motto, and I stick to it religiously. And there's no way that if you simply looked at anything I've painted recently, that would prove obviously false.
No way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I totally agree. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having colors you dig.
Yep.
Colors you dig are great.
And to be fair, you do have your teals and your pinks are some of your favorites, but I mean your sister's nights and going into those reds and golds and that sort of stuff is a big departure from that kind of safe zone.
Absolutely. I mean, you gotta play around with it sometime. You can play with leaving your comfort zone at the same time, right? Yeah, exactly. All right. So speaking of comfort zone, let's get into the Sisters of Sigmar here. Now we're right back in my wheelhouse.
Right into your comfort zone.
That's right. Exactly. This is like the opposite of the danger zone.
Yep.
All right. So the Sisters of Sigmar, he said that he painted these sisters more than a year ago, but reworked on the bases, and this was his first time using Vallejo metal colors, and he added a color into his black and white to make them less boring. All right, so let's take a look. Okay, so overall, these girls look really nice. I think there's a couple shots in here I quite liked that I want to. Yeah, here we go. Yes, so this is a great example of exactly what he's talking about: the addition of the color into the black and white. This slight sort of purple tone into the gray that just makes it so much more interesting, right? Like we look at this and suddenly there's color here. There's something that's interesting. This is like the difference here between that and having it just in black and white is truly monumental. All right. So I dig that. That's absolutely fantastic. And that's just it. Like, I think actual color wise, I quite like these. Let's see, I guess that's it. Okay, cool. So our biggest challenge with these girls is that honestly, the sculpts, I love them, but they do show their age. They're a little rough, right? And so what this actually means is that you've got to work really hard on these to like have your paint compensate for the shortcomings of the models. I hate to admit that they have them, but they do. And so what I mean here is like the things like the distinctions between everything aren't always as sharp. This girl looks really nice. It looks like you got all your edges cut and stuff like that. Some of them I noticed, like when we look back here, right? Like getting under the hand, the separations of the metal, stuff like that can be tough to smooth out. You just, these models show every flaw, right? Because they are kind of rough metal models. So I get it. That being said, I can't bust your chops for it too bad. I mean, it's just what happens with these things. It's really, really hard. And I think overall these girls look really good. Parts I do like quite a bit. I think the color balance looks nice on the black and white. I think the addition of the purple looks good. I think the shading on the metal looks good. The flesh tone is also quite nice. They're a bit overexposed in your photos, so we probably want to wheel back the light just slightly, as I do feel like we're getting a little bit of a washed out look at them here, which is a shame because I think they look really good. But that's just something, pictures are always the bane of my existence too. So again, can't really judge you too harsh on that. All of my pictures suck. So what are you going to do? My biggest piece of advice for you would be on your metal. See what you can do to push it farther with the shading. By the way, I like the Mother Superior with the new Stormcast hammer. Good touch. I as well added some Stormcast hammers to my sisters that I did because heck yeah. But the see if you can get some more shadow into there. So like up in here. By the way, isn't the obvious difference in the smoothness between the sculpt of plastic and metal here just shocking? Like look at this hammer and how rough the sculpt is versus the crisp amazingness of this plastic, right? That's why this is why metal models suck and plastic models are really good. Anyway, these are standouts from their generation, but they still have shortcomings. So see if you can get the shadows even darker. That would be my advice there. just because I think that would do a lot to make the metal stand out. And then the other thing I would note is on some of your black, I think you could afford to hide even a little deeper black into the shadows. Go for maybe like something even slightly satin in the black tone. That way it'll look, if as long as it's not pointed toward the light, it won't be reflecting, and it'll actually it'll look like black that is wet is darker. Satin has a look of wet black. It will be darker. So yeah, there you go. That, and on the girls with hair exposed, like girl here, here, and here, you probably want to push some more tones into that blonde hair. So a little bit more of a sepia tone in there, a little bit more of a light highlight around the edge, that kind of thing. They have really great hair with like, just like they are a Vidal Sassoon cover come to life, often in ponytails. So, or whatever you call it when there's multiples of them, braids, I guess, just braids. So, you can really do a lot of work on that hair. That does have a lot of nice stranding and detail. But overall, these look great. I dig the heck out of them, man. Really, really awesome work. All right. So next up, Adax has a little animal for us. And then Philip has a abhorrent Archregent ghoul guy. How about I take the lizard and you can take the ghoul?
Sounds Gould.
All right. Haha. All right. So this is an animal challenge post, #animal challenge. And he's just looking for a few suggestions to push this guy up another notch. Okay.
Next level.
Next level. All right. Here we go. So here's our dude. Okay. What can we do to get to the next level? I'm going to move around here real fast and just we're going to go quick hits. Ready? Quick hit time. Quick hit number 1. More variation on the scales. Use the natural sculpt. So let's talk about your ridges here. You have all this wonderful ridge lining. Make this darker. Make the lower edges on each side brighter to make each one pop out. Bring some hashes up of a slightly brighter color toward the end. Like you can do this in near white, like in an ivory, and then put your glaze colors over top of it to still get this effect. Make the ridges themselves that are cut in nice and dark. Boom. You'll have something that really pops and has that look of the naturally worn scratch scales. On your bone, I want to see more tonal variation. Most common thing we say about bone, it's very true here. You have some nice ridging and stuff, but you're using the sculpt, you're not pushing as far as you could. Also, we've got some blue spray back here, I suspect from probably maybe the airbrush. I don't know, but I would watch that. Push these into a deeper tone. I don't care what it is, by the way. Could be anything. You can go the traditional brown of bone. Doesn't have to, though. You could go any color. You could go into red tones. A more ruddy brown could look really nice, or some red to contrast well with the green scales. Could be very subtle, extremely desaturated. I'm not telling you to put Ferrari red on this, like a red brown. And I'm not talking about Red Brown, famous B-movie action star from the 80s. I said red brown. Same with the teeth. Obviously, we really want to show some more very like striations and variation there. That's a big opportunity. I like the glossiness of the tongue. Carry it all out. That's fine. Some spit strands would be cool. If you've got some Uhu glue, that could be a fun one. Deeper, just as I said, for these lines, cut them. The lines in between the printed scales here need to get much darker. There's not that much difference between here, and that's a problem. These are very, very deep ridges. They should be popped out more. Same with the variation out to like his knees, the top of his arms. The green here is about the same as the green here, and these should be very, very different in color. Okay. Finally, on the base, we've got our standard gray cork rock. Boring, boring, boring. Cut it up, hash it up. Put some more texture on it. Get some color in there. Rock isn't gray. Give me some green tones, some blue tones, some red tones. Really mix it up. In fact, if you had red, brown worked into the bone and then some nice red on the base, that'd provide us a nice little color triangle on this guy and really balance him out with some warmth below and some warmth above with a beautiful color circle of warmth in between his cold body. So overall, I really like the striping. I like the green. I like him in general. Like, you're very creative with your animal. His eyes look really, really nice. He's expressive. He's colorful. I dig him. We just need to, there's your stuff to take it up to the next level. Really, really good eyes. And the glossy wetness in the mouth really sells. I dig that. Yep. Carry it out a little farther.
Yep.
But yeah, that sells. All right. Abhorrent Ghoul Archregent King guy.
Yeah, so First time using water texture, using the Vallejo color. He used tape, filled in texture, removed after 24 hours because of the van der Waals force. Hey, he knows a lot. The water was higher at the edges compared to the middle of the swamp and don't know what to do about it. Maybe we have some tips. So, primarily looking at this. Now, I have not done a ton of this myself, but I have watched quite a few tutorials. And by the way, I like, first thing I'll say, I love the coloring on this guy, the gray skin with the pink bat wings. I think that there's a lot of good things going on there. This model's really cool. I love that they took the Ghoul King, kind of look and just blew it out with this guy and made it, I feel like, more intentional. That said, because this is resin and because it is clear, you can take a razor blade to it and cut it. And so if you were able to do some, if it's just the little edges, from the water or the kind of liquid coming up at the edge, you can just trim that off. And you're not going to see the cut lines. You're not going to see that stuff because it's all clear. So that's something there. I don't think that you can apply heat to it or anything like that necessarily. So that's the way I've seen done. Vince, do you have any other tips on the edges there?
Oh, how to get them nice and smooth and even. Sand, like you can sand it down and then reapply a gloss medium over or gloss varnish over the top. That's another old school trick.
Nice. So if you sand,
you want to use like an 800 grit sandpaper, like
so if you so
something really high grit.
So if you sand it and it creates a bunch of abrasions, which
is what will happen,
diffuse the light and make it look matte, then you apply a gloss and those abrasions will go away.
Exactly, because it'll naturally a nice layer of gloss varnish will naturally seep into the abrasions and even everything back out. Does that make sense? It's the same way you gap fill with gloss is actually what's happening here.
Another thing I think you could possibly do is do a slight pour on top of this.
Yep. That's another one.
And let those ridges be the kind of cup in which it sits in. And maybe it would end up, how sometimes water droplets can create the opposite effect when there's enough surface tension, and maybe you'll get a little bit of a bulge there. So there you got 3 ways to deal with that. Let's see, what was it called? The van der Waals force, the unfortunate resin walls force.
It's annoying. You're not alone. That's what I will say. All right. Very good. So let's see. Looks like we've got 2 left. We've got a big building and we've got some Namarti. So let's take a look at both of these together, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right. So we'll just do the last 2 of these together. Okay. So first off, we've got not even going to try. But he said, second attempt to post some of the recently painted Idneth Deepkin. Looking for an overall opinion regarding the paint job. He's always trying to overcomplicate and push to a higher standard, covering mistakes. This is the first ever elf unit he painted. Very cool. Look forward to his airbrush skills. He can clearly see mistakes with dry brushing skin. Also, last thing I want to say here. Okay, cool. So let's take a look. Oh, G-Luck. Hey, if that's what you're calling yourself, I can do G-Luck. That I can do. So, G-Luck, let's talk it out. Everybody should have a nice nickname like that that's easy for me to say. That would be super great. I would be appreciative of that.
Unless he's just saying good luck.
Oh, maybe he is. Oh, darn it. I bet you're right.
I don't know.
That's probably what he's saying.
I don't know.
And I'm just a moron. Man, I thought he had a nice, easy to say nickname. All right. Well, now I'm an idiot. Either way, here we go.
I like the way his name looks.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. Okay. So, let's take a look at these Namarti.
I gotta say, I think the Namarti are some of the best foot soldiers that they make.
Yeah, they're good. They're real good.
I love the tones that are going on with the basing and the bows and the kind of that metal work. I think those go together really well. And I think really that warmth in contrast with the cold skin works really well.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. I really think that probably what we need to do here is like what I'm noticing is we're a little flat. I would avoid like just general rule, don't dry brush skin, especially not as like a later job because you will get stuff like this. Now I'll say at a decent or at a distance, these guys look fine. I think they're perfectly perfectly good for like your an army, right? I mean, there's limits to what we want to take an army to. So like just zooming back out to like one of these shots, I think these guys look very nice. So you've painted a very good looking unit. I totally agree. Basing looks awesome. When we get close is where we can see the flaws, but also we see the kind of lack of variation. Like the pants here are very saturated blue and they're very uniformly saturated blue, and there's not a lot of other blue around. This is the kind of thing where like I would have liked to see the bow feathers be the same color as the pant blue or a similar bright blue. That would have been a nice way to balance these guys out in like a nice little color triangle. Boom, boom, boom. The skin does need a more variation. That's the place where we're very pale, but we're also kind of chalky pale.
If you go back to the first shot again, if the goal is that 3-foot view, yep, the guy on the left. I mean, some of these guys look almost translucent.
Yeah.
I mean, the color selection and the way you've built it up, I think, is
good.
Is good.
I like the final color of them. I really do.
Yeah.
I feel like they probably just need a little more contrast in the low shades, right? Some soft purple tone glazes,
Sure.
I think could go a long way here. The green has a little more variation. I like that better. The blue is a little flat for me. The blue in the metal looks good. I like that. And I like the bows. I think those look nice.
You mean the green in the metal? Not the blue. Oh, the blue in the metal.
The blue in the metal.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think that would be really my main piece of feedback. Like, if you're going to do the dry brush trick on skin, which is fine, like I would generally avoid dry brushing skin because it is prone to make it looking rough. But you can do it, especially because like I don't know how many of these Marty you got to paint. Could be like 70 or 80 of them. So like, come on now. Just make sure you do some very soft, subtle glazing at the end. Like grab your Druchii Violet or some thin purple ink, or even take some purple paint. Get yourself some flow improver and a little bit of glaze medium or just thinner medium or anything like that. Work it into a nice glaze and just softly, subtly apply it around some of those areas, like the sides of the head, below, the curvature of the skull, into the cheeks. And that'll smooth that out. And I really think they will actually seem brighter, right? Because they'll have a stronger element to contrast against. So.
Well, and yeah, as you say, I mean, if he already kind of felt like that dry brush was a mistake, it's not unsalvageable.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah, like I say, like be careful with dry brushing as sort of like with the idea that it's a dangerous final step, but it's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. It's not like there's anything wrong with it. It's just you want to go in and do the rest of the work, right? Like you can't stopping there is where you get a problem.
Yep.
But yeah, overall, cool stuff, man. I dig it.
It's very cool.
All right. So next up, we got a big tower. Observatory for a Mordheim swamp table. Pigment for the first time, but now I'm scared to varnish it and change the color. I mean, don't have to. Can if you want. Whatever. Just use some. It shouldn't change it that much. If you're using a spray varnish, it shouldn't really change pigment color that much. Like I often will varnish stuff that has pigment on it, and if it's sat like that, you're not going to see that much of a change. Especially if you're just using like some tester's dull coat or something, it's not going to have that big of an impact. Yeah, overall, I dig this. I don't know. What do you think? Why don't you give us the first shot at there, Eric? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're starting. You've done a little bit of the thing everyone wants to do is kind of pick on individual bricks and stones and give them some life. But then what I really like is the fact that you've kind of worked the pinkish rust on the dome, kind of, and had it drip down and fall down onto the building, and then from the bottom having the moss creep up. And I think that's a really good trick to giving some color and giving some story to the building. So I think those things are really cool.
Yeah, I like the green tones in there. This is great. We just, how many times even in this review have we talked about adding color to stone, right? It's the most common thing that I see people do is they leave their stone just kind of gray and boring. And that's definitely not the case here. I think this has a really nice set of tones to it. We can see the red rust dripping from up here, green where moss has grown. I think that's really nice. I think if anything, you could maybe stipple some darker and lighter colors on there, grab a bit like before you put on the pigment. You wouldn't do it now. The trick is like before you would put on the pigment, you grab like a sort of big dry brush and you just kind of do like some back and forth stippling of various colors of maybe like a little bit of dark gray, a little bit of black and stuff like that. Just so you kind of get the impression that the stone has some natural inclusions and deformations. I don't know, whatever the word would be. Deformities. Yeah. That's the right word. That's what it is. Yeah. That's the word.
I like the idea of there being some scorch marks, as if somebody's tried to raise this thing before, or torch someplace. I mean, there's a lot of cool things you could add. The other thing that kind of speaks to me is I feel like, a banner or something coming out of, sticking out.
Ooh, yeah.
That's something you could add after you finish this up. So, I mean, it's not the end all. So, but I think you've put a ton of life into this thing already. It just kind of begs for more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is like, it's terrain. And look, the reality is terrain is meant to be played on. It's not meant to be like some, in most cases, perfect execution of the hobby, right? It's meant to be something that's used. People are going to jump on it, mess around with it. It's going to get, kind of screwed up. So there does come a limit on like what you want to invest in terrain. So overall, I think like as a terrain project, I would call it 100% successful. If you wanted to go farther, you've got some options out there, and it would just be like, do more of kind of the same of what you've already done, right? More texture, more stipples, more stuff like that. But on the whole, I think it looks really good.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, we're going to bring ourselves to our intermission here. So I'm going to stop sharing. No, wrong button. Sorry. Which one is it? There we go. Stop sharing. My goodness. Okay. And so we're going to go take a break, grab some coffee, get a shower, change our clothes randomly for no reason. And we'll be back to finish out the month. Back in just a moment.
Going to go find Kieran.
That's right. Hello, everyone. We're back. The PmP continues. Mr. Stone Monk is back with me. We've refreshed. We've gotten our coffee. We've gotten, cleaned up, changed our clothes, as you do in the middle of an intermission for no reason. And we're ready to jump back into this. Eric, you ready to continue on with these fantastic submissions?
It'll be hard, but I'm up for it.
All right. Well, let's do it. So, sharing up. We begin. Scott Palmer brings us the Potion Maker from Kingdom Death. It says he tried to push her in a lot of areas, amping up the contrast and dark lining, more depth in the freehand, making the hair look better. Keep composition in mind. Originally, he had thought this was going to be competition, but then he realized that sort of, not everything got cleaned up as well. So he decided to just finish it out. Perfectly fine. I've been down that same road myself, my friend. Yeah, I think this is a really good piece. I think it does read well. You've got some transparent cloth in places. I think that reads. The color composition, I think, is quite nice. You managed to balance out sort of the magenta and the purples quite well. The skin tone on it's absolutely fantastic. I think that really worked. Going for the more sort of deeper, more, sort of tan Arabian skin tone, I think looks good. The freehand on the pants reads. You didn't go over the top. You didn't do every inch of the pants. And I think that actually works in your favor. I think just having it along the lower parts actually makes it better because it stands out against the upper areas. And then the small parts on the sort of, I don't know, tabard, shawl, whatever that is in the middle. I think that also looks good. I think the bottom works better. The leggings works better than the tabard, just because the tabard doesn't look quite as clean, doesn't seem to heed the shadows as much, that kind of thing. I think my main feedback for you would be to just sort of continue pushing some of the contrast on some of the gold areas that you've got there. Some of the sort of non-metallic gold is a little bit flat And I think we could come up a little higher on that to really get that pop in there. The face itself could use like, and again, like that headband, that could be a great way to add some real shine, some pop, some light catches to maybe draw attention back there, because you do kind of lose the face, unfortunately. The other thing that pops out at me just as a very minor touch is the smoke. The smoke doesn't get light enough. It's sort of universally too dark to be smoke. Just it's a weird thing that just jumps out, right? Because it's so dark gray. So yeah, that's just kind of a thing that hit me. Now, as to the hair, I love what you did. I wanted to go to this shot because I wanted to kind of show off the hair. I think you had mentioned that you put a lot of extra time into it, and I think this really sells. This works great. You have a lot of different tones, a lot of different little lines, showing lots of rich depth to the hair. This is fantastic. This is wonderful, like auburn, sandy, brown, blonde hair. I think that's really, really, really great. This I dig the heck out of. So very, very well done there. Yeah, good stuff. Thanks for submitting, Scott. Okay. Yeah. Next up, Lady Oleander.
Yeah. So Daniel's kind of struggled with it, like most of us do with these kind of bigger models. Sometimes you get a little frustrated. You're not quite getting it to be what you want it to be. You put it away for a little bit, and he feels like he rushed it a little bit to get it finished. His request is to get us some feedback on the basing, because he wanted something more, dioramic. Is that the right word?
Sure, let's go with that.
Dioramic, like a diorama. And then some color scheme and overall appearance. So first of all, if we let's go to the second picture first.
Okay.
And he's first, great job putting these in multiples, but here we've got this kind of dilapidated grave site, and I think it looks fantastic. You have a lot of cool things. You've got a path, you've got a grave stone, you've got, the coffin is up, you've got some interesting flowers and posts and all that kind of stuff. So I think the basing looks fantastic for this miniature. Sets a real mood and has a lot of really dark and muted tones to it, which I think is really great for a graveyard. And so I think that comes across really well. Let's go back to the first picture. I really like the color tones that are happening, the greens and the purples, and them being kind of muted and mossy. And I feel like instead of being ethereal, you're almost treading on real cloth that's just been eaten in and that sort of thing, or degraded, or mold growing on it or something like that. I don't know if that's what you're going for, but I like it. The two things I would say as far as overall appearance is that when you've got the ground so kind of dilapidated, etc., and you've got the clothing that's so muted and desaturated, to have such a bright silver in the kind of staff that she's holding and her adornment on her head, that threw me off a little bit. I'd want to see that maybe darker and some other tones, some other. I think here's an opportunity to go with either something like a gold would stand out very much, but you could go really tarnished or go really yellowish, or you could go rusted, that sort of stuff. I don't know if that's the direction you want, but I think that bright silver sits a little, stands out a little awkwardly amidst the rest of the kind of subdued and dilapidatedness of the rest of the miniature. So do something with that would be one suggestion. There's some details like on the front of her robe that don't get addressed. So I think that's something that would, because right now that green is just kind of like, it's a little bit flat everywhere. It's in all the places. So bring some of that contrast out, do some things there. I don't mind the transition between purple to green, but the last thing I would say is for the mood, since the base is so dark and coming out of that space, I would darken up the fringes of the model more to fit more in with the graveyard, and then let the top of the model be lighter and more etheric, as if she's coming out of that darkness into and starting to create her own light. That would brighten up those top areas, etc., more in contrast. So those are a couple of thoughts I have. I think the color tone is a great way to go. The diorama looks fantastic. I'm really glad to have this on the PmP. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. Great piece.
Mhm.
Okay, so next up, Daniel brings us an orc commando for kill team.
Yeah. And let's see. Not seeing it from there, but let's see what he's saying. So, the backpack is from Cromlech. Head was done on the original Head Plus, some green stuff, and detail parts. Well, I think it's always fun with orcs to be able to put your own pieces together and see what you come up with. I love this kind of the way you've broken things up. You've got the khaki, you've got the green, you got some black spots, you've got the red accents, etc. All of that works really well. The khaki in particular, I would say, I think you've done the most to kind of give it some depth. The darks, in the dark crevices, it's really dark. It's highlighted up. It looks worn. It looks wet. It looks like it's been through things. I really like the red on the metallic, where it's kind of I guess beaten up and that sort of stuff, and that's really good. And I'm seeing some really good, I think, use of shadow, etc., in the greens, along and the skins, etc. First thing is, I think you need something else on the base to make sure he's walking through something. Is he in a vegetative space? Is he vegetation space? Is he in a city? Does he have anything like that you can put on the ground to kind of play with that? His eyes get a little lost for me as well, so maybe a lighter color there. Overall, I think, with this hunched orc, what you want to do is brighten up the face a little bit so that I can see exactly where his face is. And so maybe there's you put some markings or something on his mask that brighten that up. You brighten up the face, the eye above the eyes to be a little more yellow, maybe, to put that together. Or you draw a big arrow that says, "Look here." I think that's appropriate for orcs as well. Otherwise, I think this guy looks really cool. Obviously, he's going to be really fun to play in kill team, and I think you've done it's a great start to a kill team force.
Absolutely. All right. So next up, True Jess says his first time posting in the PmP review, and he's both excited and a little nervous. Oh, don't be nervous. We don't bite. It's fine. It's all good. He said this is a model inspired by a German RPG called Genesis. Okay, cool. He played some time ago. Let's see. Trying to cure the plague. He tried to push this to a display quality. Some serious problems with flash and imprecisions of the cast. Did his best to eliminate those. Okay, cool. No base for now, but he's going to try to, it didn't come with one, so he's going to try to just scratch build one in the future. Well, hey, at least it stands upright, so that's nice. It's a well-balanced miniature, so that's always cool. General critique, maybe on color choice. He says, as he's colorblind. Oh, well, then I'm not sure that's fair to critique you on color choice if you're colorblind. But okay, well, nonetheless, we'll talk it through. So overall, I think this guy's really great. So he looks like he's in a larger scale. I assume this is a 54 millimeter. He kind of looks like he's about that scale, maybe 75. Hard to say exactly. But I really dig him. So interesting things going on. Good use of tonal variation on the sword. I talk about this a lot. I like the alternating sort of shades and highlights here where you've pushed that up. I think that works really well to make the metal interesting. Same, here on the arm, you can see where the same thing was done. You can see it when we go back to that image and see where we got some different shades there. So I think that's good. Here, it really sells here in this picture where you can see a little bit of the blue tones were pushed in. We have the darker, sort of black ink here, silver. So that way we get that nice variance. I like that a lot. Overall, I think where your biggest opportunity is on a piece of this size is really in two spaces. And that's in your sort of blue-gray and the white. Now, I understand these are matte colors, and so they're not reflecting a huge amount of light. But I feel like we could have pushed the shadows a little more on both of these to add just a little bit more visual interest. They seem a little too samey throughout. Your leather has some really nice variation and texture. I like that. The black seems to have some nice depth to it, especially down in here under the arm, where I would expect it. So I like all of that. Same with the mask, and the red, much the same there. And actually even the same with the cream cloak. Like I look in here and up under here, and I have these nice subtle mahogany tones and stuff like that in here. So I like all of that. But then I come to the sort of cold white in the center of the figure, and he's quite flat. Now I can see where you pushed a little bit of blue shadow here and here, but there's a lot that I feel we could go a little farther on, especially maybe here on the sides of his torso where it's starting to fade away. Certainly down here on the interior of his legs, maybe up here. This shadow could probably be pushed out even a little more. The legs is where I really notice it with these sort of shin guards, because I feel like this area here should have and under the knee should have a much more pronounced shadow. Again, not like I'm not trying to say, hey, go up to how your sword is looking. Obviously, this is metal. This should be way higher reflective. But this just feels a little flat compared to the richness of tone and texture in the rest of the piece. Other than that, I think this guy's done really well. Like the red cloak looks wonderful, looks quite rich. The helmet works. A little bit of design there is good. I think the color choice is fine. Like the sort of light blue gray is so weak as to not really contrast against the red, which is the only color you have that's sort of vibrant, and that's cool. I think that sells just fine. It's because the addition of it out here on his arm was absolutely the right choice, because now we get a nice balance of it regardless of which side I'm looking at him from. So I think that really works. My best advice would be pushing some shadows more here. And then if you really want a stretch piece, do a little more with this cloak in not the color, which looks great, but like give me a design, a brocade pattern, a freehand, add some dust and dirt to the bottom. If this is like a post-apocalyptic game where his cloak has gathered some detritus from the road, just little touches like that can make him really feel like he's part of a world. So yeah, that's my thoughts, but very glad to have you share it. True Jest is a great looking piece.
Absolutely.
All right, so next up we have a Tomb King chariot. So we got two death things, and this is and then we've got, what is this, Reignor the Grimhauler or whatever, right? That's what he is.
Mm-hmm.
So which one would you like, sir? You want to take Mr. Reignor and I'll take the chariot?
Sounds good.
All right.
So what we're looking at is this army has a yellow theme. So the king in yellow, so he's really pushing his yellow work. And then he tried a couple of things that were new, some stippling in the clothing, and then marble on the statue, which is I think is a fantastic thing to attempt, especially in a model like this where there's so many things going on. I feel like if I messed it up, there'd be a lot of other things to distract from. But I think it's safe to say that let's go one more slide over and look at I think we'll see the model. Go one more. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. I think the marble's looking really good. Even from this distance, I see the kind of the veins and that sort of stuff. It gets, I think, with the detail of the statue, possibly it gets lost in that detail, or that it's hard to tell what is a shadowed crevice and what is a vein. So it might be a little busier. And so perhaps you could go with a white glaze, or people have been talking a lot about white inks. I have no idea. A white glaze to kind of maybe to soften some of those, so that maybe you have fewer veins, some more pronounced, and some things like that. But I think, as far as technique, what I'm seeing, that those veins look really good. So I think then it comes down to how do you apply it so that it reads the way you want it to. But I think that looks really good. Now we're looking at yellows. I really appreciate, well, first I'll say is I appreciate the overall tones, the kind of purplish pale flesh, and then adding this kind of moldy green or sage green, dark sage green to it. I think that combo is really good. Makes me feel a little bit more like Nurgle, like this is less ghostly and more kind of Nurgle-y, which I think is a cool take on it, or like morbid burning, whatever. The yellow, I think, is, given the photography, feels a little bit flat, partially because you're working with these really big flat surfaces. Certainly you've used some shades in some good ways to kind of get in those cracks and have some shadow there. But when you get these long stretches, even in that, you're going to want to see a transition, a gradient from a darker orangish yellow into a brighter yellow. And so, and while you've got some highlights, line highlights, I don't think that shows up as well for yellow until you get, I mean, you need to have it there, but I think you need a bigger transition from these things. I do appreciate your placement of your yellow, both on the candle or on the robes and the hood, and then the little dude underneath, which I don't think comes with the model, does it? I think that maybe it does.
Which one?
The little guy on the base.
No, he does not.
So I think that's a fantastic placement and use of that, and then that yellow kind of corresponding as if he's some worshiper of this guy and he's sprung out of the grave and scared the bejesus out of him. In the model, similarly, you've got yellow all over it, and then you've got some good washes. Here again, with yellow, you'd probably want to be darker in the base, come up to brighter yellows on the arms, etc., and show a gradient across that. It's a hard yellow's a hard one to do. I'm working a lot with yellow right now and trying to figure out how to do as little as possible to make it look good. I know Vince, you've done a little bit of work on some not Iron Hands.
Imperial Fists. Whoa.
Imperial Fists. So go check out Vince's videos on that. Or have you done?
I haven't done the yellow video yet. It will be soon. It will be soon.
So soon. So stop your army right now and then wait for that. No, I think it's a great attempt. You're tackling some hard things. Most of this model is everything you're doing is going right. I think the yellow needs a little bit more work, and then maybe subdue some of the veins in the marbling. But it's a fantastic piece. I should go. I don't know if he's posted the army elsewhere here, but I'll be looking forward to seeing more of it.
Yeah, I agree. I really like the subtle purple he worked into the horse. That really sells for me. I like that a lot. Good pop color. Okay. So now we've got a Tomb King's Chariot. So Marco says he made it in time. He tried for the first time to freehand the fabric of the burlap sack. Came out so-so. All right. And he's more satisfied by how he modeled the base. Okay. So let's take a look. All right. So here we've got a guy being drug along behind, which is always fun. Also, I do love, thank you, Marco. We love these combined pictures. It makes our life so much easier. So this is a lot of fun where we've got a guy in a sack and another guy getting drug along. Yeah, the lines on the burlap, I get what you mean. Like, it didn't totally work. My best advice would be you got to go like thin and really, really pull those threads tight. Like, it's the sort of thing where you almost have to texture with no space in between to sell the burlap thing. Or you go the opposite direction and do almost none of them. And you just put a couple cross hatches on it. Right. And then cover those over. So either a lot more or a lot less. That's my best advice. Now, as to like the nature of the bone. Yeah, I think like the dudes getting carried along and all that works fine. Like, I get the piece. I think that's cool. That sells. I think my two sort of main pieces of feedback for you will be with the bone, like with these horses. And God knows I've painted a lot of Tomb King's horses. I think you want to push the bone to have a little more variation in color. It feels like you're going for a dirtier bone, which that's okay. Like, not every sort of Tomb King-y thing has to be this super bright bleached bone. I'm all right with that. But I can see the differentiation. I like that you have like some edges and stuff on there. I think that works. But you probably do want to push a little bit of lighter spots into some places. So I'm thinking here of like this section of the ribs where light would naturally catch and gather because of the shape of their rib structure. The top of the head, like this part is still relatively dark, where this is a large flat space that would, probably gather the most light, right? Top of the spine ridges, edges of the spine here, just little tiny touches of kind of upping that brightness a little can still make the horse feel, a little dirtier, a little older, but it'll preserve that. The other thing I would say is I like your lines you did in the stand. That's cool. Like, where it's actually drawing its, like the wheel marks, the treads. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. The tread marks. They are a little too wide, which I think is what you were referencing in there, but you knew that because you had mentioned it. So you'd want to keep the treads a little thinner, right? These look like they were put in by a 4x4 as opposed to this thing. But if you're going to go for this theory, like if this is your idea that it's cutting these treads in the sand, here's my question. Where are the horse hoof prints? Okay. If you're going to sell me on part of it, sell me on all of it. Like some horse hoof prints scattered around would really sell the illusion. Like there could be 2 here and 2 here, right? Because he would have clomped a couple times. And to do that, by the way, you can just use the actual horsies. So like I've done footprints before, and when you want to do footprints into a soft substructure, you literally just use the model, right? So you press the model's foot down, like take 1 foot and or a different one. If you have an extra one, you can just take a leg off an extra one, whatever, it doesn't matter. And just go pop, 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 and you like press it into the sand. Okay. As to the sand goes, a little bit probably more white or faded yellow. The sand feels a little too deep yellow in some of the shots. So you may want to look at like just the color balance on your sand overall. Tip it a little more into like the brown and away from yellow. Cause like it feels a bit too, like having some yellow is obviously good. Sand has a yellowish tone to it, but it feels a bit too yellow. Like when I look at this guy's yellow shirt, the sand isn't that far off it. Whereas that feels like that might be a bit extreme. But overall, this is a very fun piece. Pretty cool. I love the use of the 2 of Johan and the other guy from like the giant bag or whatever in this very creative way. It's a super fun piece. So keep them coming. I'm always happy to see Tomb King stuff. So anytime you want to submit that, hey, I dig it. All right. So next up, we've got a Banshee. And I would love to take this one because this is... Lahoma says this is her first miniature she ever painted, and she's using golden heavy body acrylics, which I'm excited for. Nice. If you'd like to take this other ghost from Jared. We got ghosts everywhere. So many ghosts.
Yeah, go for it.
Must be a ghosty month. All right. So heavy body acrylics are really interesting. I assume, Lahoma, you said that you already had on hand this stuff. So I assume you've done some art before, because otherwise it would be strange, I suppose, for someone to just have a wide selection of golden heavy body acrylics on hand. And I wanted to go to this one because this will kind of show and explain what I'm going to say. So this shot right here captures kind of everything I want to talk about. So first of all, for your very first miniature ever, it's great. It's fine. You're batting way above average. Okay. So let's just lay that down right now. Okay. I'm only going to give you some thoughts if you want to keep using heavy bodies, because it is a very different experience and you are starting from a very different place than most people who paint miniatures would operate from, right? Because obviously most people who start painting miniatures go out and buy some miniature paints. Nothing wrong with that. There are plenty of absolutely award-winning artists who basically use heavy body acrylics for 90 to 100% of their work. So there's nothing innately wrong about the paint you're using. It is absolutely doable. As someone who uses a fair amount of heavy body in their own work, I would give you these following thoughts, though. When you see here where you can really see the strong brush strokes and streak lines and stuff like that, with your heavy bodies, you have to paint a lot more on the miniature and sort of use water and medium to thin it out and draw it into something smooth. One of my best pieces of advice I can give you and that I found for working with heavy bodies, especially over large flat areas where they tend to want to show brush strokes, is taking a fairly decent size amount, a dollop of the paint, going onto the miniature and then using brushfuls of sort of medium or flow improver or a mix of those on the miniature and actually painting on the miniature, smoothing it out there with a fairly large brush. You want to use the side of the brush and just kind of work it in. This can be a great way to wet blend too, where it seems like you want to have a little bit of blue in there. You can kind of work those two colors together, almost in how Bob Ross used to paint with oil paints, where he would kind of lay down a thicker amount of it and then just start smoothing it together, right, with a brush. You can use a very dry brush for this. You can use a very medium and flow improver heavy brush, you're going to get different results in both cases. But the point is that you're not using a brush with more paint, right? You've already put sort of all the paint down on the model in a non-traditional sense. So that's what I would recommend for smoothing that out. It is funny because you're painting your first miniature and your white looks so clean and sharp, and like that's heavy body acrylics in action. The other tip I would give you is think about maybe picking up some artist inks. Artist inks can also be a great complement to heavy body acrylics to get in there and do some soft, subtle glazes at the end. And it's probably a thing you might be familiar with if you're already working in 2D art with heavy body acrylics. Sometimes you might have some artist inks lying around, some Daler-Rowney or some Liquitex or on and on and on. As long as they're artist inks that aren't really water reactivatable and have the normal light fastness and stuff like that. The final tip I'll give you, this is a minimal one, but welcome to the world of miniature painting. The last thing you have to do is paint the edge of the base. Don't leave the edge of your base messy. This is always just like the difference between this base, how it looks right now, which is unpainted and with your smudges from what you did above, and a nice clean black rim around the base. It will blow your mind how different this mini looks when you put a nice clean black rim around the base. Think of it like the frame around a photo. Okay. The difference between a poster just tacked to the wall and a poster that's in a nice frame is the difference between looking like you live in some crappy rundown frat house and looking like you live in somewhere who has like, you know, a nice home. That's really the difference. So put a black rim on the base.
And if you have posters that are just tacked to the wall, Lahoma, no offense.
And also get some frames for your posters. If you're an adult over the age of 22, you should not have posters tacked to your wall.
There you go.
You should have frames for those. It can be minimal, but come on, people. Frames are like $10 at Joanne Fabrics. You can do it. Okay.
All right. So Jared has only painted a handful of miniatures in his time and is in a place where he's ready to kind of commit and do a little bit more with this. But get this. Here's the thought process he had. One, he wanted to kind of stray away from the ethereal and go with something a little bit more kind of a turquoise up to a bright green. And two, he wanted to capture kind of dusk by painting the base and skulls and the sword with some pinks. Brilliant decision-making here. As I look at those things, those are certainly some aspects that really sell kind of the time of day for me. And that reflection in the sword at the top, you know, kind of having, it's almost like that purple there is inside the pink, and it diffuses out into the bright white. And I think it looks fantastic. It absolutely looks like things are reflecting off of it. And I'm really happy with that. In terms of the body of the ghoul, I think also the wraith, a great choice to kind of go with this sort of color. It's very vibrant. He referenced ectoplasmic, which is you know, Ghostbusters and, you know, 100 other kind of ways of looking at it. And I think you've achieved a very kind of neon kind of look. If we you can see a couple spaces here down kind of underneath his stomach, kind of that first fold, and a little bit to the right underneath where the kind of hood is dark, where we've got kind of the more turquoise color and popping out into the bright greens, or green and then a bright green. I think you've done a really great job of capturing kind of the shadow that could even be within a wraith. If we go to, let's go maybe two more slides, Vince. There to the back. I think, and you've got a little bit there under the hip. I think you could go a little bit further with that up into the back and maybe under the arm to give as much contrast here. Because on this side, it's a little bit more of the green everywhere. But all in all, I think you've done a fantastic job of setting a goal, trying to achieve that goal with specific colors, and you've executed it very well. Your blends, your transitions, your highlights, everything is very crisp. Everything reads super well, and I'm definitely getting the vibe that you set out for. So Fantastic job.
Yeah, I think this is a super cool piece. Like for somebody, early in their miniature journey, this is fantastic. So imaginative.
Yep.
Like I love the different use of colors here, the bright lines. It really adds a lot of visual interest to what would otherwise be a very simple miniature. It's a great example of how to punch a simple miniature up to the next level.
Yeah. Yep.
All righty. So let's see. Next up, oh boy, I'm not even gonna try. Okay. So this is his first diorama. So I'd love to take this piece if you want to handle our Stormcast friend here from Ian.
Sure.
All right. So I cannot pronounce your name. I apologize. I'm not even going to try. We're just not going to embarrass ourselves. And so this is a gift and his first diorama he painted ever. Okay. He said that most of the colors, some need smoothing, but he wants to be sure of the direction before he puts more work in. And he feels a little paralyzed. Sure. Color composition, is it interesting? Non-metallic metal highlights placement, the armor, what could you do? And what can you do to add more wow effect? Okay. So he wants to have a sort of strict contrast between the two parts. Male, female, green, red, dark, light, cold, warm. Okay, great. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look. Yeah, so he wants the female character to be more warm and the male character to be more cold and stuff like that. White hair, red hair. Cool. I do agree we want to smooth out some of the blends, continue working, stuff like that. But like, let's talk about how we would take this up. So I'm going to kind of let me go over here and answer this question on non-metallic metal. Yes, and more. Like we need more contrast here and it needs to be smoothed out, right? So like this should be going to pure black up here to something very dark. Most of this should be going to pure white, or yeah, this should be actually, that should be your pure white. This should be your dark. If you're going to put a dark here, then this should be opposed by light, or realistically, your white should actually fall here. This should be kind of gray, white, gray, back to dark again down here. And then so on and so forth. Like when you think about non-metallic metal, there's lots of different ways that your reflections can happen, especially on weird shapes like this. But in general, you want to be opposing light with dark. That's the easiest way I can describe it, right? And
also,
in general,
also the plot for many fantasy stories.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Opposing light with dark. And in the same way, a good way to do this, let's go back to him real quick. Compositionally, like, cool, he has white hair. Give me some more tones, though. White hair isn't stark white like this. It should actually have grays. And if you want to sell the cold thing for him, love it. Let's do that then. Let's make his skin shadowed in purple and blue tones. Let's put some blue tones into his hair, some blue grays, right? Let's really sell that. Let's work some purple or some purple. Yeah, some purples and blues into this cloak. The fact that it's green, that doesn't matter. Give me cold highlights instead of this yellow green you're going for, because this is actually warm right here. This is very warm because you have a yellow green. Give me a blue green, and that'll cool this cloak right out, right? So if you want this part to be cold, then bring those elements into everything. Get rid of these red bracers. Make this a desaturated brown gray, right? Like cool the whole piece out if you want to sell that kind of compositional element, right? Work some subtle blue tones in glazes into your non-metallic. One, it makes doing non-metallic way easier because you don't have to blend straight from like black to white. You do it through blue, which makes it just so much easier. And two, it'll actually cool the whole metal out. Over here on her, same thing, but in reverse. So work more red tones into her skin. Her skin is actually quite nice. You've already got a good amount of that. She's more tan. I feel more sepia tones in here. She's much farther along the road than him, where it feels a little flat. But like, give me some more red tones in her skin, especially up under her arm and under her clavicles, around the lower part of her shoulder here, that kind of thing, up under her arm. Give me some orange tones getting cast up under her dress by whatever this fire is. Here and here. Give me some yellow-orange OSL reflections and things like that. When we bring down the shadows in her dress, make them sort of warm grays instead of using like traditional blue tones or those kind of shade colors to cool off the dress. Because again, the white is too flat. Like it's just a flat white dress, and we would need some kind of shadows in there. Especially if this is casting light and this is casting light, then all back here should be heavily shadowed, right? But make it warm shadows. Don't use browns because browns will make it look dirty, right? When I say warm tones, pick like some very, very subtle reds, deep reds, crimsons and whole reds or something like that. And, you know, glaze them in very lightly and then go back over them with some of your white. And then when we get to the environment, that's where you're really going to sell it, right? So when you work these two pieces more into their environment, you know, make sure that the stone, the rock, the pieces over here on her side all have elements of rust, work rust and you know, reds and stuff into the stone. Like, it doesn't all have to be just fire. You can do elemental pieces, just like that is to say the stone could have more reds and warm greens and stuff like that. That'll still make this area feel more alive and vibrant. Whereas over here, work me in some blue tones, some cold purples and stuff like that into the base, right? So that way it feels more, maybe more gray browns. So that way it feels more dead, more cold, more lifeless. That's my thoughts on that and how you sort of can set the, basically when you're setting things like temperature and the contrast and the composition, the feeling, carry those ideas throughout everything. Everything you touch should communicate those. That's my best advice. Oh, neat. There you go. Cool. Yeah. Yes. What you're talking about here is exactly right. Yeah, good. Okay, neat. I didn't know you had this picture in there. I didn't go this far forward. I'm so sorry. Yes. Black oily stuff is good. I would also have some blue tones over here. Like I said, I think that could also work really well. But I dig that, man. Yes. Execute on this. What you did here. Yep. It's so funny that I spent all this time saying it. And he's like, yeah, that's what I'm doing, man. Great. Good. You may just want to cool off some of the green a little bit. So like have a little bit of blue into your green here, and I think you can sell it. But yeah, good stuff, man. That's so funny. Yes. This thing I spent a lot of time saying that I could have just flipped to this picture of. Do what you have planned. Also make sure she's more attached here when you finally put it on like this. Don't have such a hard separation. Make sure she's actually part of the scene. He feels very part of the scene. This thing feels very different right now. So just make sure she's properly worked in.
Yep. I like
All
it.
right, Ian.
All right. Ian has two things he's been working on. One, wings. He's not very happy with them. And I tell you what, those wings are hard to be happy with. In general, they're a hard one to paint. Two, he's to match with his Sylvaneth Force, he's made the armor wooden. And so if there's a couple of spots, let's go a little bit. So you can see a little bit of that in the chest. If you go to the next one, I believe we'll see an overhead. There we go. His right pauldron there has some grains in there, but he feels like he's gone too dark. And how does he lighten it up? So first of all, as I mentioned, the wings, those are difficult. They don't line highlight well. It's hard to use the edge of your brush so you can get a little bit of paint on your brush, or you get paint up and down, as you would, and then you wick off some of it so it's a little bit drier on the brush, and you drag the side of it along the edges, and you can sometimes cheat a little bit by using the side of your brush instead of trying to draw a line with your brush. But even that is hard to do on here because those rays of light are so close together that you end up hitting the next one over with your brush. It's not an easy. These are not easy things to do. I felt like I was only mildly successful because I was able to use an airbrush a little bit to do that. Now, that's not always your case. I think, and I can't quite tell if you're using airbrush on the wings or not. So what I would rely on is for the wings is just bringing some more light to them. And the other thing I'll say is dry brushing doesn't work great on them because it gets chalky. But I think that dry brushing if you do some dry brushing to bring some white back into it, and then you can glaze that back down so that chalkiness goes away, that might be a way for you to kind of improve how you feel about the wings. Also, you could do something where you do a white edging around the metallic, so that just draw kind of around where the metal hits and the wings are coming out of the metal, to give a sense that there's the brightest light is emanating from inside that metal out to the wings where they get more purple. So it'd be a couple of ideas. I'll let Vince jump in a little bit if he has some ideas for the wings. But then for the wood, I really like that the image where we see the front of him, we see the chest. I think that wood works really well with the silver kind of hardware, and it reminds me very much of like a wooden chest or that sort of thing. So I think that there's some elements that are reading well. The photography is a little bit dark, so it's hard to see all of that. But when I looked at that pauldron, what I would say is it looked like you had a lot of short, dark lines, and I would maybe encourage and dark and thick lines. To the best of your ability, if you're able to make those thinner and longer across the show that grain traveling from one end of the section to the other end of the section. Certainly, sometimes you can stop or create like a knotted piece or things like that. But having a more subtle kind of tonal shade between the darkest and the lightest, or that mid color. And then I think on the pauldron and some parts of the chest and some other areas, you could go with a lighter color to kind of highlight some of those where maybe right under your darkest lines, put a bright one so it feels like we've got some reflection coming from above. And just you don't have to lighten it all over, but certainly kind of maybe create some places where it is a little bit lighter. Now, the other thing you could do is you could start off lighter with a bone color or I'm trying to think of a good brown, light kind of orangish brown color, and then go in with a kind of one step down in shade to create the lines, and then use shades to darken it up little by little to see how dark you want to go, rather than trying to kind of go really dark and then lighten it back up, which I think will probably require a bit more brushwork to do that. So those are my thoughts. Vince, do you have any thoughts on the wings?
Yeah, I think in general, like you were exactly right. I think in general you want to work it so there's a lighter ring at the outside. And so the way I always thought about it is like make the light lines on the rays come in toward the mini farther than you do the lighter area on that. They're easier with an airbrush, admittedly, you know, but like just having some fairly wet flowing paint that you then wick off the excess, as you said, is probably your best bet. It's just, they are very tough wings. You're not wrong.
So, but this guy looks good. I really love the concept. I've not seen anybody try wooden armor before. And so I dig it. Keep it up.
All right. Next up, let's see. We've got, oh yeah, this is great. I love this one. So this is a classic bust, Sorsha here. So let's do, I would love to take the bust if you wouldn't mind taking our Eldar Walker dude.
Sounds good.
Okay. I know it's probably not in either of our wheelhouses, frankly, but I see Sorsha and in pink, and I'm like, I got to talk about this.
Yeah,
right?
you go for it. Okay.
So Brian brings us, yes, Sorsha. This is a classic bust. I love this one. This is obviously from Privateer Press. He said any suggestions would be appreciated. He chose not to weather and chip the armor. That's fine. He went for parade clean. He's interested for feedback on the true metallic metals. He likes TMM and uses it a lot. Is there something you do to take better photos? I don't know, man, on that part. If you figure out anything, you come tell me, because I am terrible at photos. And I think these look perfectly fine. You have a nice lighting scheme. As far as better ones, good luck. Photos are eminently my frustration. Okay, so keeping the armor nice and clean, I don't think that's actually an issue. I've seen some weathered Sorshas, and I've seen some parade clean Sorshas, and I think they're actually fine. So you do you. I don't think the bust suffers from not having weathering. One of the things I will say though is if you do that, you may want to think about like something to break up some of the flats on the chest. Like you could have a stripe of a different color going down one side. Like imagine like just a clean white stripe. It's always a good sign when it recognizes the face. But you have like a clean white stripe kind of running down here or something. Just, some other color element is a possibility to kind of add some more visual interest. Just cycling through, I think your transitions on the purples are really, really nice. Yeah, there's little Sorsha next to big Sorsha. The going into the purple shadow color, I think works really well. I think your highlights are placed very solidly. Like I don't see any issue there. Some areas where we could probably make some hay here are, let me see if I can actually, there you go. If I can get in on her face a little more. So a little bit more of coloration around, again, she's a military commander. She's probably not in full makeup. I get it. But there are some areas where we can add some color just in general. So I'm thinking about just adding a little more pink tone in here in the cheek, because she also feels cold. Like she's wearing this big winter hat. Sorsha feels like she's in cold weather. So when it's cold, your cheeks and your nose get a little more rosy. I don't know that you want to make her have a very red nose, because that might make her look drunk. But having some more rosiness in her cheeks will actually make her feel more cold, if that makes sense, as long as it's a very light, subtle sort of pinkish tone. At the same time, here on the side of the nose, as we get in this area, this could probably have some more color variation in it. Again, there tends to be like a lot of blood that gathers there around that side of the nose. So some very light, subtle tones there. And then bringing up the corner of both the eyelid and the eyebrow section here, this eye ridge, these should have a little more light in them to kind of pop it out. It'll also draw more attention to the eyes. Just because the angle of these tend to be quite bright, especially on like female faces. So you want to make sure that gets popped out. These can also be a place to stick a little more natural pink color, because there's more light going through a surface that has a lot of capillaries, a very thin surface that has a lot of capillaries in it. So that's going to make it appear more pink, right? Just because it's reflecting blood. And if it was in the cold, that would be even more so. Now, onto like the TMM piece. So here on this, no, I think this sells. Like, I don't think that's a problem at all. I think the TMM here on the bolts and this kind of stuff, yeah, I think that works. I think that you've still, like, you're managing the reflections and owning the light. I think I would like to see maybe a little bit brighter here, like hitting me with a little more silver here in this area. To really, like, because you've shown me there's a light reflection here. So then carrying that in to really pop just this up, like maybe some kind of real light catchiness right here, I think would really sell it. Same with here in the center of the hat piece. She has like this Skaven symbol on her head. I know it's not really what it is, but that's what it looks like. Having that would really sell it. So I think that little thing. And then finally, the leather is really interesting in how your light is placed. I think it could be interesting if you actually pushed a little more shadow down here toward this side, just like down in here, and had your light be much more strong here. I think it would actually create a nice, more center line. As it is, your light on the leather drifts a little farther than the other light sources you've told me are relevant here. So it's just a minor note. It's just something I noticed, that it felt like this was receiving more light than this. So just something small that caught my attention. But overall, this is really great. I think she looks, she's clean. The black hair is done really well. Overall, like the fur on the helmet sells. The armor's smooth as butter. I love it. Yeah, she's great. So well done, man. Okay. Eldar guy. I've only done a little bit of Space Elves. The first thing, the jewels on here are awesome, and they're a non-traditional color, being kind of like a yellow jewel, and they're pretty subtle in there. He's talking about he's not done models like this before, and especially this scale. He went with something darker, but trying to get some interest and looking for general critique and comment. I think overall the darkness of the body is a great choice. And you've done a good job of highlighting it. I think, I think this is lit fine and everything's super dark, but I'm still seeing detail. I'm still seeing kind of can make out the different pieces of armor, and it's not
just line highlighting, and that, I think that creates for a much more realistic look. Obviously, the sword has a yellowish tone to it that fits with the jewels, and that looks really well. And then the red of the kind of the helmet and the tabard are the standouts. Excuse me. And he's looking for, how do I, just general critique. And I think the thing that for me would really help this stand out more, or kind of just help it shine, would be doing something more with the big helmet piece. Let's go to one more picture. He does a great job of kind of giving us brighter on our right, its left, because it's kind of tilted a little bit, and so it's going to be hitting light more strongly on that side, and then it darkens on the other side, which I think is great. It looks fantastic. What I may suggest you do is add some freehand to that mask to kind of really draw the view, draw the person looking at it into it. And the thing that came to mind was even something subtle like, I don't know if webbing is the right term, or something that looks like the cross hatching of netting, where you've just got maybe some subtle red lines running in various directions across it, around the curve to the other side of the curve, etc., and that they're very thin. They have really bright it's a chance to play with highlights across that line. So you could work with the darkest red, create some base lines that cross over on the light side, then take your mid-tone red, do something similar. So now there's light reds traveling over to the dark side. There's dark reds traveling over to the right side. And then that bright red, you have opportunities to give it highlights in specific spots to brighten it up and show that on top of your mid-tone red. And it's just going to add some visual interests, add some, you could even do a design or something else. A pattern was just kind of what came to mind to kind of liven that up. The other thing I'd say is as much as I appreciate the starkness of the helmet is red and the tabard is red, I think that there is opportunity for other elements of the armor to be red. The fists being red, I think, could be really good. The shoulder pads, or maybe the lower legs, giving me a couple more places where that red spreads around and gives me some visuals instead of just straight up and down the model. That red is the brightest, so give me some other places for my eye to travel that includes that red as well. It's fantastic in terms of its tone, and even, I like the colors and the textures going on in the base. You could probably add something there to again, give him a living situation, that where is he at? What other things have interacted with that space? So fantastic entry.
Absolutely. All right. So next up, we've got a fun little Dreadfleet ship, and we have Elucia Vane. Oh, these are two fun ones. Which one would you like, sir?
Ooh, give me the ship.
All right. Go for the ship. Let you keep rolling then.
All right, then let's look at what is asked on that. Started the most complicated of the ships. Since the scale is different than minis, I'm wondering if there are any certain aspects of the painting things like this that make them really pop. I'm pretty pleased with the freehand, but it's a shame that it's hidden when assembled using a satin varnish on the water. As gloss to be too shiny, I think we've talked a little bit about satin having some potential, and I think that's interesting and warranted. First off, I think when you're working at this scale, you don't have so for instance, you're working from a really dark purple up to a bright purple, and your shadow starts about midway, or your transition kind of starts about midway. I think on this scale, the way light works to kind of light that up, I think you might have less. More of it would be the lighter color, and your shadows would be a little lower down on the sail. Meaning, I don't think you get as broad, or I don't know what I'm trying to say. The gradient doesn't, on big surfaces, doesn't work that smoothly across the whole thing. You get You usually get a big part of it lit up a certain color, and then the shadows are a little more receding. So that'd be one aspect. I think the other thing with this is that there are some opportunities to highlight the things that you want to highlight the most. So if you're using the darker colors down as the base of the ship itself, and then you're working up to you've got as you've got the bones or the ribbing a different color, I think that reads fine. And again, I think with the castle, it looks like you've got it primarily a single color, and then your shade is kind of closer down. We did we looked at a tower a few earlier on in the episode in the review in this month, and seeing where the kind of the dark at the base kind of starts coming up a little bit. That's probably 1.5 inches of kind of weathering coming up from the bottom. For the castle, you would see like a millimeter of weathering coming up from the base, etc. So that's part of at this scale the kinds of things that you can work with when you're working with shades and that sort of stuff. I think the other thing I think is sometimes that stuff's higher contrast, especially if you're in the sun. The sun can sometimes bring a higher contrast to those things because they're casting bigger, deeper shadows. So those are some of my thoughts in terms of trying to make it feel more to scale. That being said, I can see all the details. I can pick out different parts of the ship. I see the things that make the ship interesting, and I can travel around the model and see those things just fine. And I think that I appreciate that very much. So I think you've done a good job of making it tabletop ready. And make it I think a very lively piece, and put some really great techniques into such a small piece is great.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So next up, Elucia Vane, the rogue trader. Okay. So Alan says he restarted the hobby not quite from scratch about a year ago. Do a model for that. He said he blames myself and Kieran for this one after all those times being told to go watch the painting TMM in a non-metallic style video. He wanted to take some time and try some new stuff. Okay, the new stuff is non-metallic gold, silver, and sheer fabric. He says he used Darren Latham's suggestion of learning by starting with 4 high corner light sources and referenced his paint job trying to figure out how the lights hit and why. Okay, cool. Let's take a look. All right, so obviously Darren painted an amazing version of this, and let me just say, like, right out of the gate, this looks really great. So, like, I think you're looking really good here. Let's unpack those things that we just mentioned. The sheer fabric on the arms. Yep, sells. You would push a little more skin tone. Well, you got it really strong in the elbow, so probably a little more white is actually the way to go as I'm looking at it. Like down here, I think you nailed it on the front. I think the back could use a little more. Where there's more shadow and hence less light to show through the sheer fabric, it will appear more like fabric, right? What makes sheer fabric look sheer is light shining through it and reflecting off of the surface underneath it. So like it's reflecting off of the skin through the translucent fabric, and that's what's making the skin show through. In shadow areas, you will have less of that. So that's a thought. As far as the gold non-metallic metal, tone-wise, I think you're good. But yes, highlights, we need a little more. So like it needs to come up to a little bit brighter. Working in a little bit more of an ivory or something could be good. A few more light catches like here, 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 here. So we kind of create some like light lines across her, I think would be very valuable. When it comes down to it, like, yeah, Darren has his sort of method of like the 4 lights. He kind of imagines that there's sort of 4 lights above all the models, and that kind of thinks about how that would crisscross. But like there's lots of different theories on this. The point is just you want to have some established light source and make the reflection speak to that. In the end, as long as you've got something, like generally I always tend to think in like, okay, my light is coming from 2 p.m. You never want to go from straight above. Actually, even though we talk about zenithal, you're not usually at the zenith. You usually set it at like somewhere between 10 and 2. And you kind of make sure that the light reflects that. That's what I think you would pop up. Now, The red here of her boots and her corset or whatever are absolutely fantastic. Great shading, wonderful use of the bright lines on that. Love it. Love that. I want to see the same thing in the feathers. So like you have these wonderful lines where you've captured all the texture in the boots. Let's do that on the feathers. Like I would love some white hashes coming down the feather and then still tracking these color transitions. So like we would lay the white lines first and then do a glaze over top or something, right? So I think that would really sell. Beyond that, I really think this is a fantastically well done piece. I think she looks great, man. The sword sells. I have much less concern over the non-metallic on this. It's a thinner area, but you've got your nice edges, good transitions of shadows, good alternation of colors. Yep, I'm down with that. The black works for me of like her sort of dress or whatever here. So I like all that. I think the gold just coming to a slightly higher highlight. I think that's really your main area of pop. But yeah, she's great. Looks wonderful. She does her crew proud. That is still the greatest trailer. Well, second greatest trailer that Warhammer's ever released is the Rogue Trader one, that Cowboy Bebop trailer. And then this is our last one. So why don't we take a look at this one together, especially since it's very interesting.
Yeah.
He says an odd one for him, but for the PmP as well. You're not wrong. This is a game of Gaslands with some friends and had to get some vehicles prepped. These are all Hot Wheels that he took apart, modded, primed, painted, and then put back together. Many of the weapons are 3D printed. The bus, he tried a new technique where he primed in dark brown and then sanded, making it appear that the brown was under the yellow paint and not the reverse. Cool.
Yeah, that works very well.
Yeah, you can also, so you can sand off. You could also use the salt chipping technique, right? That would be another way to go to get that same effect. So like you sanded it down, but you could also, I think some salt chipping would also look nice here. Like this has these streaks, which is good, but also then doing some salt chipping on it or the salt chipping technique or hairspray chipping or chipping medium. There's lots of different explanations of it. I think you can go with any of that. So just kind of look up any of that stuff. And I think you got the right idea. Also add some interest.
I've seen more of the hairspray or the salt, the salt and hairspray chipping in terms of, kind of a lot of debris and hitting that sort of stuff. I haven't seen as much of this sanded down, like somebody's taken a buff sander or a circular sander and worked on it a bit to work out the rust or something like that.
Right.
And so that has I think you could use both of those. They're very distinct. Effects. And but you think about how small this is too.
Oh, sure.
I think it's a really cool.
Yeah, they're all basically Matchbox size, right? This is a larger Matchbox car, but a Matchbox car nonetheless. Yeah.
Yep.
So one thing, and that's one thing I would say is that when you get in these small, like, first of all your conversions are great. I freaking love all this stuff, man. It looks awesome. You did a great job with all these. One thing I would say is when you get into this tiny of a scale, you want to really make sure you've got contrast pop to high heck and back. So whatever metal paint this is, I would stop using it. Like it is very chunky, very pigment dense. Get yourself some Vallejo metal color. Like this is glitter paint. Right? Like that doesn't sell as metal. The real problem we have here on all this metal stuff is it's bright and shiny and glittery and everything else is rusty, crusty goodness, right? So I would actually give you, here would be my thought on getting at this scale. First off, get a different darker steel paint, like a Vallejo metal color steel, and yay. And then go to like maybe dry brush of a little silver or something on there. But the other thing I would suggest to you for the steel is some kind of wash. I would actually love it. I think an oil wash would work awesome if you have access to like some black and brown oil paints. Making yourself an oil wash at this scale would be fantastic because it would tint the metal. You could clean it up and it would flow into all the recesses really nicely. So I have a video on making oil washes. You may want to take a look at that because that could really sell the steel on all these things. And there's a couple of them like here, same story, all these places where that's where you've got the most room to grow. Yeah, I really like what you did with all the colors on these things. I actually think in scale, you did a great job. These colors have like nice rust patches, good variation. They're pretty cool. I dig all that. But your steel is very, very, very flat and doesn't really read because true metal in this scale just cannot produce the reflections you actually need unless you like hyper push the contrast through stuff like, washes and stuff like that. So that's why scale modelers have traditionally done things like pin washing and stuff like that to really up the contrast and show the lines in between things, right? Because you've got this giant plane and you need to show separations between panels and parts and stuff. So having very nice dark lines separating everything just makes the model pop. And I think that would be my main piece of feedback. Any other thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, I think, like you said, the pin washing, or even at this scale, you with the metallic, even going with a chrome where you paint it brown and then almost do just a white highlight or a bright highlight at the top, but you've got a really dark underneath, would give you a pretty high contrast kind of effect. And at that scale, as long as you see the detail of the gun, that's really what matters. So,
yep, agreed. All right, and that brings us to the end of the month. So, Mr. Eric,
yeah,
what's your pick of the month, buddy? What'd you like?
Man, there was so many good ones, and I always get caught off guard.
I purposefully pull it out like that on you, just to catch you off guard every month.
Oh man, I'm getting IMs, which are not helping me scroll through very easily. I'm going to say that I'm a big fan of Callum Haldrick's Pirates of the Drowned Men, the conversion of
I thought that'd be a hot pick for you. Yes, it's so original.
Yeah, very original and a great use of colors. The basing in particular just has a quality to it, that kind of a softness to it, that to me screams quite a bit of realism, while having these nightmarish screamer surfers, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to give it to Callum for originality and execution. There's some just great paint on there and color choice, etc. So
nice.
How about you?
So I gotta give two quick honorable mentions. One being to the Emil's Warp Seer. Loved the heck out of that thing. He was really great. So many beautiful color tones going on there. Some really great NMM. Loved the heck out of him, Andy Scaven. I got to give a shout out to Benjamin Alamome's Sisters of Sigmar. Thought they were wonderful, really interesting color tones in what could normally be a boring black and white scheme, but he added colors in, some hue, and just punched it right up. But ultimately, I think I got to go with the Sorsha bust from the that we reviewed here. I loved it. Pink is you're in my space now. She's such a great bust. I think he really sells it. The lighting is masterfully handled. She looked great. So she's my pick of the week or pick of the month. Lock it in. All right, there you go. Overall, awesome month. So yet again, as always, we love doing this, but thank you to every member of the community who's continuing to give positive feedback, offer advice, constructive criticism to everybody, helping out when people need stuff in the PmP. We look forward to next month. Don't forget, you can have one submission in here a month. And when you do, please do try to be like everybody we saw here who gave, why they're working on it, what they're working on, and what questions they have. That really helps us direct our feedback to you. So we greatly appreciate that. Thank you to all of the artists who submitted for this. We really do appreciate it and hope this is valuable. But as always, we thank you very much. And if you're interested in joining us on your hobby journey, link is down below. But we appreciate it. We'll see you next month.